Chapter 420. Reasonable. Lin Yuan nodded and didn't raise any objections. As a subject, it was reasonable for him to pay taxes to the lords. If Lin Yuan couldn't do this, how could he ask those aristocratic families and city lords to pay taxes to him? After all, the Xinwu dynasty wasn't an existence that the northern frontier could casually abandon. Otherwise, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce under his command would instantly become a joke, and the 7 dynasties would join forces to suppress him. Although the Xinwu dynasty's rule was 70% tax, the northern frontier was an autonomous territory and also had the privilege of reducing taxes. 70% tax was considered a token and wouldn't affect the northern frontier's development. It was within Lin Yuan's acceptable range. Second, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is using the Xinwu dynasty's name to do business with the 6 dynasties, but the benefits will all fall into Lord Dragon King's pocket. Don't you think this is inappropriate? Zhang Xiu's smile didn't fade. It was obvious that Lin Yuan's action of agreeing to pay taxes had given him confidence, so he struck while the iron was hot and raised the second condition. It's appropriate. The one who replied to Zhang Xiu this time was Lin Yuan's confident reply. Then, without waiting for Zhang Xiu to come up with words to persuade Lin Yuan said, "The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is now able to pass through the Hengduan mountain range and do business with the other 6 dynasties because it is 100% under my control. Therefore, I don't care if this is your idea, Lei Qiusheng's idea, or that influential person's idea. I won't make any concessions." At this point, Lin Yuan even yawned and said lazily, "Of course, you might have a way to seize the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's ownership by force or even make me suffer in silence. In that case, I can guarantee that no caravan will be able to pass through the Hengduan mountain range. Even the Xinwu dynasty's various prices, especially the prices of feis, will rapidly increase to a price that you won't be able to accept." Zhang Xiu's smile dimmed, and he almost couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. Lin Yuan's words were too arrogant. The moment he spoke, he directly called out Zhang Xiu, Lei Qiusheng, and some influential people. It was obvious that he didn't intend to give anyone face. He even threatened Zhang Xiu that if they dared to make a move on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, the situation of him raising the prices of feis would happen again. Although the embroidered guard's spies in the northern frontier had almost been completely uprooted, everyone knew that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's control absolutely belonged to Lin Yuan. Even if one had climbed to the position of vice president in the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, if Lin Yuan didn't say anything, they wouldn't be able to take out any feis from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's storehouse. This was because the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's storehouse was in the Stoneclaw Forest, which belonged to the Fey Beasts' territory. Without Lin Yuan's order, any human who stepped into the Stoneclaw Forest would definitely not have a good ending. As for Zhang Xiu's previous idea, he had wanted the Ether Association to cooperate with another Fey faction and replace Lin Yuan's exclusive control of feis. However, it seemed like this plan had come to an end. Why would a caravan under the banner of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce be able to cross the Hengduan mountain range? Because of benefits? Of course not. That was because Lin Yuan had the final say in the northern frontier. He also had the support of the 3 Beast Kings and Beast Lord Kirin. Lin Yuan, who had contributed greatly to the Fey Beast race's expansion, naturally had the face to do this. Even if the other Beast Kings didn't like humans, they had to suppress their temper and watch the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's caravan pass through their territory on account of Lin Yuan's expansion. However, if it were another Fey Beast clan, they obviously wouldn't give Lin Yuan face, not to mention that Lin Yuan was very likely to be the next Beast Lord. This was especially so for the Green Swamp clan, which was the worst choice. The Green Swamp clan was indeed one of the stronger clans in the Hengduan mountain range. Even the great Beast Kings had suffered losses before. However, there were many other powerful clans, and not all of them were as good as the 9-colored Deer clan. An existence like the Green Swamp clan was no different from a rat crossing the street. If they were allowed to do this, no matter how many goods were transported, they would never be able to return. It was precisely because of these factors that those beast kings had opened the door to Lin Yuan for the sake of benefits. However, I am not an inflexible person. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce can bring in huge profits, and it's naturally impossible for no one to be jealous of this profit. Therefore, if a powerful ally is willing to join us, I naturally can't ask for anything more. I can make the decision to give you 30% of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's annual income. As for whether this profit will be given to you, or if you will give it to Lei Qiusheng, or if it will be evenly distributed, that is your own business. I only need you to help me withstand the internal pressure of the Xinwu dynasty after receiving the benefits. Don't let anyone casually reach out to the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. As a compromise, I can agree to let the embroidered guard's spies re-enter the northern frontier. However, I must have a list of these spies, and they must unconditionally accept the Council of the Fey Emperor's surveillance. If they do anything that crosses the line, or if there are spies not on the list, I will immediately eliminate them. Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes flashed with a dangerous cold light. He sneered and said, "If you don't agree, then you will have nothing. When the world falls into chaos again, I won't be as easy to talk to as I am now." Zhang Xiu thought for a moment before nodding heavily. Not to mention the Xinwu dynasty, even in the 7 grand dynasties, the status of merchants was actually not high. There was no such thing as business tax. Lin Yuan was willing to give them 30% of the profits, which was equivalent to giving the Xinwu dynasty a tax that was even higher than the annual income of the northern frontier. Moreover, it was the kind that would be directly sent to the private treasury. After receiving such great benefits, it was reasonable for them to help Lin Yuan resist the pressure from the nobles. That's all for this. There is one last thing. Zhang Xiu sighed helplessly and said in a deep voice, "His Majesty often says that if you are a Fey Emperor, you will definitely be a good minister who can rule the world for him. Right now, His Majesty is very interested in your reforms and is willing to use the northern frontier as a test area. At the same time, he will also open up some new test areas within the Xinwu dynasty. However, your attitude towards the sects and aristocratic families is already very clear. However, for His Majesty, there is still a huge problem that has not been resolved. The various vassals." Lin Yuan smiled and took the initiative to ask. "That's right." Zhang Xiu nodded and said coldly, "There cannot be a second example like Lei Qiuming." Actually, learning from Lin Yuan to deal with the northern frontier king was also a method. However, Lei Qiusheng would definitely not be willing to do something that would shake the royal authority and the foundation of the Grand Dynasty. Chapter 421. Your Highness, it's not good. Outside, there are a lot of rioters outside, and they are attacking the main gate of the Hu estate. A guard of the prince's mansion, whose armor was stained with blood, rotten vegetables, and eggs, quickly walked over and reported to Hu Yan, who was standing on the main seat. Hu Yan, who was confronting Qiao Yilin, was slightly startled, and the anger in his eyes almost solidified. The northern frontier was now peaceful and prosperous. Those refugees who didn't know the top of the food chain in the northern frontier even praised him, the king of the northern frontier, as an extraordinary prince, a hero who could open up a paradise in troubled times. Therefore, these people definitely wouldn't attack his private residence for no reason. Moreover, for such a big matter, even if his subordinates wanted to report, they wouldn't say it out loud in front of so many outsiders. In order to avoid unnecessary panic, they would at most come over and whisper a few words to give him enough time to react, and arrange for these family heads to leave the Hu estate's main courtyard first. Therefore, at this point, it was already very obvious. Qiao Yilin's sudden attack, the rioters attacking the main gate of the Hu estate, and the guards reporting it out loud regardless of the consequences. All of these, from the beginning to the end, were conspiracies planned by the Association of the Demon Emperor. The guard in front of him, whom he trusted the most, was also a member of the Association of the Demon Emperor. Tonight was Hu Yan's private banquet. In order to prevent the association of the demon emperor's spies from sneaking in, he even cleared out the Hu estate servants and branch family members in advance, including the servants, the cooks, and the guards. They were all his trusted aides, and anyone who he suspected was not qualified to enter the Hu estate's main courtyard tonight. But even so, who knew how many of the association of the demon emperor's spies were in this group of people? Sure enough, almost as soon as the messenger's voice fell, all the patriarchs in the Hu clan's courtyard shot up from their seats as if there were steel needles in their chairs. Pairs of ice-cold gazes fell on Hu Yan's face, as if they wanted nothing more than to swallow Hu Yan alive. To these family heads, they were all in the same boat. Apart from being the family head of the Hu estate, Hu Yan also had the identity of the king of the northern frontier. At such a crucial moment, Hu Yan gathered them here to put on a show and give Lin Yuan an excuse to wipe them out in one fell swoop. Feeling the cold eyes on him, Hu Yan opened his mouth several times, but couldn't say a word. He couldn't explain anything now. Even if Lin Yuan didn't take this opportunity to wipe out the northern frontier families, he would still skin them ruthlessly. As the person who set up this trap, Hu Yan was very clear that even if Lin Yuan didn't take care of him, these family heads who suffered losses wouldn't let him have an easy time, and the entire Hu estates would have no place in the northern frontier's northern frontier. Everyone's performance today has been broadcasted by the Association of the Demon Emperor through the projection stone in every city in the northern frontier. Family head Hu, now do you know why the people of Shunning City attacked your Hu estate? Xiao Yilin patted the non-existent dust on his gown, looked around at everyone with a cold face, and said in a cold voice, ever since Lord Dragon King took over the northern frontier, he pushed for new policies, established new laws, and built new cities. Every move he made was for the betterment of the northern frontier. You are all northern frontier families, and you are all existences who share the same fate with this land. I originally thought that you would help Lord Dragon King, but I didn't expect that all of you would only be eyeing the small profits on your plate. Everything was as Li Zhong had predicted. Ever since Lin Yuan took over the northern frontier and established the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, all the sects and families made a lot of money in the beginning. Even the commoners who worked in related industries made a lot of money. After Lin Yuan defeated the sects, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's profits were split between Lin Yuan and the aristocratic families. In the process of suppressing the sects in the northern frontier, the aristocratic families didn't do anything at all. Only the Qiao family showed their faces, but the aristocratic families didn't let go of any of the profits that the sects gave up after they withdrew. They thought that the aristocratic families were already satisfied. At least with the example of the sects, even if they were dissatisfied with the land clearance, they would only complain in private, but on the surface, they would definitely cooperate. But no one expected that the aristocratic families would resist so strongly when Lin Yuan wanted to take away the land that they didn't value very much. It was obvious that they only wanted to take in and not take out. They only wanted to reap benefits from Lin Yuan, and completely didn't think that they would have to contribute something to the reform of the northern frontier. Li Zhong had only thought of this after being obstructed again and again. Previously, the benefits of the northern frontier basically fell into the pockets of the aristocratic families. This time, although the land would eventually belong to the northern frontier prince's mansion, the commoners would actually benefit from it. Now that the aristocratic families didn't want to give up their land, Li Zhong simply used Hu Yan's last stand to let the commoners know who was obstructing the implementation of the new policy, and who didn't want them to get the benefits that they deserved. At this point, the public was completely infuriated. When the commoners of Shunning City attacked the Hu mansion, Li Zhong knew that the Hu mansion was just a small microcosm. Soon, all the aristocratic families in the northern frontier would face the same scene. Their greed would bring them the cruelest consequences. At the same time, the entire northern battlefront army cancelled their vacation. They were transferred to the northern frontier from all the posts, strongholds, and outskirts barracks. A large number of demi-human warriors from the monster forest were also transferred to the northern frontier. Under Li Zhong's operation, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier would be destroyed. At the same time, the northern frontier would also become chaotic. The arrival of the army could maximize the control of the situation. First, neither Lin Yuan nor Li Zhong wanted to take advantage of the situation to wipe out the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. Second, once the northern frontier became chaotic, people with ulterior motives or those lazy thugs would follow the trend to rob, fight, and smash things, which would make the northern frontier even more chaotic. Therefore, Li Zhong was very clear that the situation couldn't be out of control. Even if he had to use force, he had to repair the cracks in the chaos as soon as possible, so that everything would be under his control. The young man surnamed Wang's face obviously looked better. Although the commoners in the northern frontier might not let the Wang family go, he dared to go against Hu Yan and express that he didn't want to be Lin Yuan's enemy, so it wasn't completely useless. Even if it was just a show, Lin Yuan would protect him, the sensible head of the family, and the family. Chapter 422. When Zhang Xiu returned to the imperial capital, it was already 5 days later. It wasn't that Zhang Xiu was slow, but that he had stayed in the northern frontier for the past few days and had been discussing some details with Lin Yuan. Zhang Xiu had only left when he had more or less understood Lin Yuan's plan and the future reform of the northern frontier. On the way, he had already begun to record what he had seen and heard in the northern frontier. He then organized it into written documents and prepared to submit it to the Emperor Shenwu when he met him. After greeting the 2 guards, Shen Lin Jun, Zhang Xiu tidied his robe and walked into the imperial study. He raised his eyes slightly and saw Lei Qiusheng sitting on a large chair with a worried face. His right hand was holding the back of the chair and lightly tapping it. He was frowning and thinking about something. Zhang Xiu cleared his throat and bowed to Lei Qiusheng. He said in a clear voice, "I, Zhang Xiu, greet the Divine Martial Emperor. Thanks to your Majesty's blessing, I was able to successfully establish contact with the Black Jiao. These are the details. Your Majesty, please take a look." After he finished speaking, Lei Qiusheng seemed to have realized that Zhang Xiu had walked into the imperial study. He cleared his throat and the worry on his face instantly disappeared. Immediately, one of the eunuchs serving Lei Qiusheng bowed and trotted to Zhang Xiu's side. He held the documents that Zhang Xiu had written with both hands and trotted back to Lei Qiusheng's side. "My dear minister, you may rise." Lei Qiusheng took the documents from the eunuchs and lowered his head to read them. He didn't even raise his head as he spoke. Only then did Zhang Xiu stop kneeling. However, he still maintained a proper posture and stood there, carefully observing Lei Qiusheng's expression. After about 4 or 5 breaths, a smile appeared on Lei Qiusheng's originally serious face. He said in a low voice, using the greed of the aristocratic families to incite public anger, deliberately allowing the people under his rule to suppress the aristocratic families, and also increasing the strength of the troops stationed in various places. "This Black Jiao is very powerful. He has the entire northern frontier aristocratic families in a tight grip. Even if they can survive the anger of the people, if they want to earn a living in the northern frontier in the future, they will have to rely on the Black Jiao." Ever since Lin Yuan had taken control of the northern frontier, Lei Qiusheng had been observing Lin Yuan's actions. On this matter, Lei Qiusheng didn't blindly trust Zhang Xiu and the embroidered uniform guard like before. Instead, he sent out imperial spies who had been heavily nurtured but might not be used in their entire lives to gather information about the northern frontier. Ever since Lin Yuan had chased away the Green Marsh clan and completely confirmed his position as the overlord of the Stoneclaw Forest and the surrounding areas, Lei Qiusheng had sighed from time to time. He expressed that if this Black Jiao, who had broken the norm, was a human, he would be the best candidate for the position of Grand Secretary of the Shenwu dynasty. "Your Majesty, the information about the northern frontier is just a matter of convenience. You asked me to ask about the Black Jiao, and he also answered." Zhang Xiu stood with his head held high and chest out. However, a hint of seriousness flashed across his eyes. He said in a deep voice, "In my humble opinion, although this Black Jiao has given a solution, it is a strong medicine. Your Majesty needs to plan slowly. At the very least, you have to wait until the rebels under the Qingping King's command have been dealt with before you can implement it." Order of gratitude? Before Zhang Xiu could finish speaking, Lei Qiusheng interrupted him. Zhang Xiu knew that Lei Qiusheng was expressing his dissatisfaction with him for interrupting him. He simply shut his mouth obediently and waited for the result. He had inquired about every detail of Lin Yuan's order of gratitude. On the way back, he had thought about it repeatedly. He was certain that although this move was beneficial for the Xinwu dynasty to weaken the vassal kings, once this decree was issued, the vassal kings of the Xinwu dynasty would be in uproar. Even the imperial clan court would express that this move was against the ancestral system. Although Lei Qiusheng was the founding emperor of the Xinwu dynasty, the monarchs of the 7 dynasties could not avoid the harem. Firstly, they needed a large number of heirs to choose the most suitable candidate to inherit the throne. Secondly, in such a large dynasty, aristocratic families, sects, and even nobles were forces that could not be ignored. As an emperor, he had to establish marriage relationships with various forces. Otherwise, if the people's hearts were not stable, the emperor's rule would not be stable. Therefore, whether it was Lei Qiusheng who sat in the Xinwu dynasty or the vassal kings who were enfeoffed, they all had many concubines. These women did not have any other abilities, but they were definitely not that great. Otherwise, they would not have been sent to the harem by their families to fight for favor. However, they were indeed good at seducing men. Even a diligent monarch like Lei Qiusheng had 17 princes and 8 princesses. Even if Lei Qiusheng did not have any more heirs, after these princes came of age and selected suitable heirs, the remaining sons would also be sent to various places to be vassal kings. Once these vassal kings operated in their own territories for too long, it was easy for them to become recognized as kings by the commoners. Not to mention the fact that there was an emperor above them. Just like Lei Qiuming's rebellion this time, there was not a single person in the entire Qingpeng who said no. Although Lei Qiusheng's rebellion was successful and the royal family of the Wanjian dynasty was swept clean, those old bastards who had followed him to conquer the world were still enfeoffed as vassal kings in various places. Even if their contributions were not enough to be conferred as kings, they were now high-ranking officials. After a few decades of effort, as long as they were not exiled like Yan Xingqi, even if they were a pig, they would be able to operate a considerable force in their own territory. Lei Qiuming's order to gather hundreds of thousands of rebels was indeed shocking. However, which of the military officers and nobles who had followed him to occupy the magpie's nest had less prestige than Lei Qiuming? They just did not take advantage of this opportunity to rebel. If they had any ideas, their influence might not be any less than Lei Qiuming's. Lei Qiusheng wanted to prevent Lei Qiuming's rebellion from happening again. Removing the vassal kings was the most important thing at the moment. However, whether it was now or in the future, there was no difference. If he wanted to remove the vassal kings, it would definitely cause the vassal kings to retaliate fiercely. Perhaps the situation that had been stabilized with great difficulty would once again fall short of success. However, using the Edict of Pushing Grace to remove the vassal kings was the safest method. The vassal kings in that place did not have 7 or 8 children. When the old vassal king passed away, according to the tacit rule of the 7 great empires, the eldest son would inherit the old vassal king's title and territory and become the new vassal king. Day after day, he would continue to operate in his fief. As for the territories that belonged to the emperor, they would be enfeoffed to the new vassal king when the new emperor succeeded the throne. After all, they were all the emperor's sons. However, in this way, the imperial power would be lower and lower. Even when there were many vassal kings in the country, the emperor in name would only be considered a slightly stronger vassal king. Chapter 423. Not to mention a tyrannical emperor like Lei Qiusheng. Even if he was the lord of the earth, he would not want his territory to become weaker and his faction to become stronger and stronger. Therefore, the imperial power would constantly collide with each other. If those vassals were as troublesome as hedgehogs, then the change of imperial power would evolve into a struggle for the throne. The emperor's sons would frequently scheme in the imperial capital, and for the sake of the throne, they would not hesitate to kill each other until the strongest prince was chosen. Lin Yuan's command of pushing grace was different. This was a strong medicine, but it forced the vassals to be like the emperor. After their death, they would equally distribute their territory to each of their children. Although the title did not change, the actual power gap was too big. A prince would become a duke, and a duke would become a marquis. After 2 or 3 generations, most of the descendants of these vassals would also be guarding a city. It would be a fool's dream if they wanted to challenge the imperial power. At that time, the emperor would find a reason to take back the territory. The command of pushing grace was also a poisonous scheme. Just like how the ministers in the imperial court favored different princes according to their relationship and faction, the subordinates of the vassals naturally favored different princes. Once the command of pushing grace was taken out, whether the vassals were willing or not was another matter. However, except for the eldest son, each of the princes would spend a lot of effort to ensure the implementation of the command of pushing grace. After all, to be able to get a part of their father's territory was better than having nothing. It was better to be a rich man in the royal territory, afraid that his brother would find an excuse to kill him. By the time they regretted, it would already be time for them to split the vassal territory and pass it down to the next generation. What was the use of regretting at that time? Oh. After reading Lin Yuan's command of pushing grace, Lei Qiusheng let out a long breath and sneered, "Amazing, amazing. If these sons of mine had half the ability of this Black Jiao, I would not need to continue to be in charge of the imperial court in the name of Heaven Dipper realm. I would have already found a place with rich spiritual energy to cultivate." Zhang Xiu bowed slightly but did not speak. As the newly appointed head of Lei Qiusheng's secret service, Zhang Xiu could do many things without any taboos. If an official below rank 3 offended Zhang Xiu in any way, Zhang Xiu would not even need to find an excuse to kill them. However, when it came to matters related to the succession of the throne, Zhang Xiu could not be involved at all. "Your Majesty, although the writ of gratitude is feasible, now is not the time for us to imitate the Black Jiao's new policies." Zhang Xiu lowered his voice and said with a serious expression, "Although Shenlin Jun is strong, it is impossible for him to sweep through the entire territory with the strength of an army. When the rebels react, the situation that was stabilized with great difficulty will change again. Now that the Black Jiao is willing to cooperate with us, if we can persuade the king of Qingpeng to send out the 3 armies together, we will be able to pacify the world. At that time, it will be time for us to use the token of pushing grace." Lei Qiusheng closed his eyes slightly and leaned on the big chair. The great divine martial emperor was actually forced to worry about personal gains and losses by a group of rebels that could be easily annihilated. Even the imperial guards that guarded the imperial capital were not able to make all the rebels disappear in one battle. However, the Qingjiang and Shuangjian empires were still biting like vicious dogs. Almost all of the imperial forces were gathered at the border battlefield and there were not many troops to pacify the rebellion. It was already the limit of the imperial forces to maintain the current situation. Now, the only thing that Lei Qiusheng could hope for was that the 2 largest groups of rebels would accept the amnesty. Only when the king of Qingpeng and the northern frontier sent out troops to suppress the rebels could the Xinwu dynasty be truly stabilized. "Let them go." Lei Qiusheng slowly opened his eyes and a sharp light flashed through his pupils. He said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about the northern frontier. The generals Li Zhongsheng and Zhang Qilin were both from Shenlin Jun. Even if these people die, they will not turn against me. As long as the Black Jiao does not change its generals, it means that it has no intention of rebelling for the time being. Instead, we need to pay more attention to the king of Qingpeng." "I understand." Zhang Xiu bowed slightly and replied in a deep voice. On the other side, in the northern frontier, Li Zhongsheng was wearing a black armor. Looking at the red flag in front of him with the word Li printed in black characters, his eyes revealed a look of contemplation. 1,300,000 soldiers of the southern expedition gathered behind Li Zhongsheng. Under the leadership of the various generals, they formed a square formation. They did not look like ruffians at all. Instead, they revealed the aura of a mighty army. An hour later, the southern expedition would officially step out of the northern frontier. They would sweep away the rebels nearby and expand the battle line until it covered the entire north. They would be separated from the imperial capital of the Shinwu dynasty by the Wei River. Commander, what are you thinking about? A guard went up and covered Li Zhongsheng with a cloak and asked in a low voice. Li Zhongsheng's right hand pressed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. He said bitterly, Emperor's Grace, people, the Dragon King has given me a difficult problem. From the education that Li Zhongsheng had received since he was young, the actions of the aristocratic families were not wrong. After all, Shen Lin Jun either chose soldiers from the orphans of the soldiers who died in battle or chose young people with good family backgrounds near the imperial capital. These people had received education since they were young that the imperial capital was supreme. Apart from that, the aristocratic families were respected. However, during this period of time in the northern frontier, Li Zhongsheng had already seen the power of the people under the guidance of Lin Yuan. Li Zhongsheng originally wanted to protect the rule of the Shinwu dynasty, reduce the welfare of the people, and enslave the people was a natural idea. He had been attacked more than once in the northern frontier. Even now, Li Zhongsheng did not know whether his original insistence was right or wrong. Otherwise, when he received Lin Yuan's transfer order, Li Zhongsheng would have gone back to the northern frontier prince's mansion and told Li Zhong everything. That way, even Li Zhong would not have provoked the anger of the people on the northern frontier to target the aristocratic families. However, in the end, Li Zhongsheng did not go. He more or less wanted to escape. The guard pondered for a moment and said in a low voice, General, things have come to this point. It's meaningless to say these things. This time, we are sending troops to suppress the rebels in the north under the orders of the Shinwu dynasty and the Dragon King. I don't understand the worries in your heart, but you can think about it later. For now, it's more important to complete the task at hand. Li Zhong turned his head and glanced at his personal guard. He smiled bitterly again and shook his head. The purpose of the Southern Expedition Army was indeed to clean up the rebellious officials, but doing it according to Lin Yuan's idea and doing it according to the Shinwu dynasty's idea belonged to two completely different paths. And now he was confused because he didn't know which path he was going to take. Let's go. Li Zhongsheng shook the cloak on his body and turned around to roar. The 3 million soldiers of the Southern Expedition immediately roared in agreement. Chapter 424. The resistance of the northern frontier aristocratic families vanished in the face of the anger of the northern frontier citizens. The reason why these aristocratic families could still exist in the northern frontier was because of the protection of the northern frontier prince's residence. How could they still have the guts to challenge the northern frontier? Li Zhong, who had eliminated his biggest political enemy, obtained the highest command authority in the northern frontier prince's residence while the northern frontier prince's residence Huyan was imprisoned. At the same time, with the cooperation of the various departments, he began to show his prowess. The first thing was to calculate all the cultivated land in each gathering place. Of course, it wasn't just about how much cultivated land there was. It also included the size of the cultivated land, the division of the cultivated land, and the output. It was also divided into 3 categories according to the fertility of the land. In this first document, the location of the cultivated land, whether it was planted with food or phase, and the estimated output was recorded in great detail. The second thing was to establish the position of grain chief according to the distribution of cultivated land in each settlement. The position would be held by the farmer who rented the most cultivated land and had a good moral character. Although the position of grain chief was just an empty title without any real power or rank, he would be responsible for calculating the total harvest in his own area during the harvest. He would also be responsible for collecting the taxes that should be paid every year. After all this was done, he would also have to prepare a written document and submit it to the local government. Unless the tax was collected, the local government was not allowed to participate in the collection of taxes. Of course, it wasn't just that the local government was not allowed to participate in the collection of taxes. Li Zhong also established various government offices such as the Population Statistics Department and the Farmland Exploration Department. He also prepared the existence of security teams in each of the grain districts. The specific authority was divided in detail and adopted a system of joint punishment. If there was a problem in any aspect, which led to a discrepancy in the amount of taxes paid, everyone would be punished. Although these new government offices established by Li Zhong were scattered in various places, none of them were under the jurisdiction of the local government. Their food and clothing were all provided by the northern frontier prince's residents. Moreover, they were all empty titles. When they met the local government officials, they still had to bow and salute. However, they also had the ability to directly report to the northern frontier prince's residence. It could be said that both sides were restricting each other. In addition, except for the grain chief, the other empty titles were all not ordinary people. The person in charge of each department would be transferred every 3 years. After 3 years, they would be transferred to another place to take up the same official position. After 9 years, if they were capable and had outstanding political achievements, they would be given priority in promotion to the various government offices under the northern frontier prince's residence. In these 9 years, if their political achievements were mediocre, they would undergo another 9 years of assessment. If their political achievements were bad, they would be immediately removed from their official position and would be investigated. The staff members below the division chief were all graduates of the Northern Frontier Academy. They were also changed every 3 years. During their employment, they could submit their resumes to the various government offices under the Northern Frontier Prince's residence to be recruited. However, they would not be given priority in recruitment. In addition to this internal system, there was also the supervision of the Demon Emperor Association under Lin Yuan's command, who appeared and disappeared mysteriously. The various government offices with empty titles, local government offices, the Demon Emperor Association, the Grain Chief, and other parties would make the same matter several times more detailed. It was not troublesome for everyone to carry out their tasks. They could also supervise each other to ensure that there would not be any conflicts. In addition, the officials with empty titles would be transferred to other places to carry out their tasks just like the official officials. There was no such thing as a flowing city lord being an ironclad official. The third matter was back to the land clearing project. Due to man-made factors, natural disasters, and other factors, the yield of the cultivated land would decrease or increase. Moreover, the land needed to be cultivated year after year. Otherwise, the land would lose its fertility and would no longer be able to grow good crops. Therefore, clearing the land was not a one-time project. After every harvest, the land would be cleared again. At the same time, a census of the population would be conducted in each settlement to ensure that there would not be any fraud. This series of reforms simply made some people with ulterior motives dumbfounded. After all, Lin Yuan was now working for the welfare of the people in the northern frontier. Establishing a complex and fair system would not cause any dissatisfaction. However, to them, it was extremely bad news. Whether they wanted to reap benefits or sabotage, Lin Yuan's move meant that they would not have that opportunity. Late at night. In the northern frontier prince's mansion. Li Zhong finished sorting out the documents in his hands and sealed the files. Only then did he yawn and get up from his office desk. He stretched his body and looked at the groups of patrolling guards outside. His pair of slender sword-like eyebrows were slightly furrowed. The land clearing project was completed, but the biggest problem was still unsolved. For example, the taxes for the officials and the people, and how should the land distributed to the farmers be divided? As the old saying goes, one does not worry about scarcity, but about uneven distribution. Some people took more land, while others took less. When the time came, there would definitely be disputes. At the same time, this was also the last chance for the aristocratic families to struggle. Furthermore, being an official in the northern frontier prince's mansion meant that they no longer had the benefits of tax reduction. Even if they could become the prince of the northern frontier, they would still have to pay 50% of the taxes on their own land. Although their salaries had increased a lot compared to the time when the Shinwu dynasty ruled the northern frontier, they still felt that something was missing without the income from the land under their names. It was easy for the civil and military officials in the northern frontier prince's mansion to lose their motivation and only know how to live in their own positions. Even if he set up a strict official evaluation system, it was useless. For these people, it was better to save up some capital to do business with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce than serve the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion. Although the salary given by the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion was not small, it paled in comparison to the benefits of a business transaction with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Although Li Zhong seemed to have a lot of authority in the land clearing project, the 10 years of tax reduction, the taxes for the officials and the people, as well as the establishment of various government offices were all things that Lin Yuan had prepared long ago. He only needed to take them out at the right time. When it came to other issues, even if Li Zhong had 10,000 ideas, he would not dare to make a decision on his own. "Mr. Li, are you planning to go back and rest?" A patrolling guard greeted Li Zhong with a smile. This guard was the one who had announced in Hu Yan's mansion that the people were storming the gate. He was originally a secret agent of the Association of the Demon Emperor. Although he was barely receiving a salary from the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion, serving Hu Yan and serving Lin Yuan were two different things. With the merit of bringing Hu Yan down, this guard had become a captain of the permanent guards of the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion. He was in charge of thousands of people. He was not a big figure in the whole Northern Frontier, but in Shunning City, where there were only 100,000 Prince's mansion guards, he was a Qianhu. Chapter 425. No, it's just an if. I want to see his lordship Dragon King. Li Zhong smiled politely at the other party. Whether a person was smart or not, it did not depend on whether he could speak eloquently or come up with clever plans, but whether he could recognize his own position. Although Li Zhong was now in charge of the land clearance and other matters, during the period when Hu Yan was under house arrest, the various departments of the Northern Frontier Palace had to deploy all their manpower to assist him. Currently, he could be considered as the highest-ranking official in the Northern Frontier Palace. However, this was only temporary. Once the land clearance was completed, and the subsequent developments were on the right track, Li Zhong, this Mr. without any official position, would no longer be considered a big shot in the Northern Frontier Palace. Even if the Lord Dragon King would reward him handsomely, in terms of name, this Lord Qian who before him would be able to crush him to death. Hu Yan had been as careful and cautious as Li Zhong back then. Otherwise, after Lei Fan had been forced to leave, the position of King of the Northern Frontier would not have fallen onto Hu Yan's head. And during that period of time, because of the Green Swamp Tribe and the Ether Society, Lin Yuan had neglected the situation in the Northern Frontier Palace. Therefore, although Hu Yan did not have Lei Fan's ability and influence, but during that period of time, his authority was much greater than Lei Fan's. Hu Yan had fallen into the trap for two reasons. Firstly, Lin Yuan had already planned this. After all, he wanted to support the new laws of the Northern Frontier and not the King of the Northern Frontier. As a member of an aristocratic family, it was only a matter of time before Hu Yan would clash with Lin Yuan over the land clearance issue. Secondly, it was because Hu Yan had become too arrogant. Otherwise, he would not have come up with the idea of going against Li Zhong to stop the land clearance project. Of course, it was still the same old saying that Hu Yan had fallen to such a state today. It was not because Lin Yuan had forced him to do it. Hu Yan and Lei Fan had died in the same way. They had both grasped authority, but did not have enough authority. Arrogance and greed had caused him to have a rebellious heart, and that was why he had fallen to such a state. Learn from the mistakes of others and learn from the mistakes of others. Hu Yan had not learned his lesson from Lei Fan, but Li Zhong had learned his lesson from Lei Fan and Hu Yan. Naturally, he would not be arrogant. Lord Dragon King. Lord Dragon King is currently in the front yard of the residence. If you go now, you should still be able to make it. Qianhu smiled kindly at Li Zhong. During this period of time, Lin Yuan would make a trip to the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion every day to check on the progress of the land clearing project. At the same time, he would also check on how much surplus grain was left in the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion and whether it was enough to supply other projects in the Northern Frontier and the implementation of the new policies. At the same time, he would also listen to the opinions of the officials working in the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion. Li Zhong nodded and thanked Qianhu before walking towards the front yard. For the other officials to want to enter and leave the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion freely, it was not a realistic thing. Each department had their own office space, and even Hu Yan could not casually interfere with the operations of each department. But Li Zhong was different. As the most popular person in the Northern Frontier, even if Li Zhong had no official position at the moment, everyone knew that it would not be long before Li Zhong would become a big figure who could shake the entire Northern Frontier with just a stomp of his feet. It was not to the extent that everyone would come up to fawn on him, but there were still quite a number of people who came up to Li Zhong to get acquainted with him. When Li Zhong came to the front yard of the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion, Lin Yuan, who was sitting cross-legged, was looking at him with a pair of different colored eyes, his gaze filled with a hint of ridicule, a hint of playfulness, and a hint of contemplation. "Lord Dragon King, your student pays his respects to you." Li Zhong clasped his fist and bowed to Lin Yuan in greeting. Lin Yuan nodded slightly in return, his gaze still shining as he looked at Li Zhong. He had no intention of taking the initiative to speak, but his gaze was clearly telling Li Zhong, "I already know what you're thinking." Li Zhong did not put on an act. He simply walked in front of Lin Yuan and voiced his concerns one by one. "That's it." Lin Yuan tilted his head and calmly said, "I thought that your brain was one of the smartest in the world. Is it that difficult to solve the problem of those officials' ambition? I gave you the authority to set up a government office without official posts, but you didn't get any inspiration. And before, the noble families were reduced from land taxes. As the person in charge of the land clearance project, don't you know to set up a business tax reduction for them? This, your student doesn't dare." The corner of Li Zhong's mouth twitched slightly. He clasped his fist and said, "You let your student set up a government office without official posts. Your student thought hard and felt that although these government offices increased expenses, they reduced the chances of officials being corrupt. At the same time, with an official evaluation system, they could also select more and better talents for our Northern Frontier Prince's residence. It's just like how some people are suitable for writing, but can't become an official. Some people are suitable for being an official, but have no education. These government offices without official posts are like a demon-revealing mirror. With one try, you can see if they're made for it." At this point, Li Zhong paused, adjusted his train of thought, and continued, "Although your student has the intention to imitate, I can't think of a method similar to Dragon King's. Not only are the government offices useless, but they will also make the organization bloated, and we have to spend a lot of unnecessary expenses every year." Li Zhong first praised Lin Yuan's brilliance, then humbly asked Lin Yuan for his perseverance. However, he didn't mention his own ideas or the business tax reduction that Lin Yuan mentioned. It wasn't that Li Zhong didn't have any ideas, but when meeting with his superior, he had to be more thoughtful. After all, strictly speaking, these things were outside of Li Zhong's authority. If he made a detailed plan, it would be overstepping his authority. As for the business tax reduction, it was completely up to Lin Yuan. After all, if this matter wasn't handled well, it would create a large number of new noble families. Although the noble families of the Northern Frontier hadn't been destroyed, in the Northern Frontier, noble families had become a derogatory term. Lin Yuan definitely didn't want the current situation to change. What? Is the government office without official posts the kind that doesn't work and only takes money? Go back and draft a notice. Anyone who has been an official in the Northern Frontier Prince's residence for 60 years will have their descendants supported by the Northern Frontier Prince's residence." Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong for a while, then suddenly laughed and softly muttered a few words. "Ah." Li Zhong immediately frowned and whispered, "Dragon King, Lord Dragon King, firstly, no one has done this before. Secondly, it's not very attractive. For the current Northern Frontier, it's better to do business than to be an official. 60 years in the Northern Frontier Prince's residence is really not as good as 60 years in business with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Not to mention supporting their descendants, it wouldn't be a problem to ensure 3 or 4 generations of prosperity. Then it's a problem with your choice of words. Lin Yuan said with an unfathomable expression, what if you say that the Northern Frontier Prince's residence will establish the embroidered uniform guard, and that anyone whose father has been an official in the Northern Frontier Prince's residence for 60 years will have a nominal position in the embroidered uniform guard, 2 ranks lower than their father, and 2/3 of the salary of an official of the same rank. Chapter 426. Isn't that the same? Li Zhong resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Once an official in the prince's mansion at the northern frontier had worked for 60 years, they would be considered to have reached the age of retirement according to the new laws of the northern frontier. Regardless of their cultivation, they could no longer continue to work as an official in the prince's mansion at the northern frontier. However, they could receive a pension from the prince's mansion at the northern frontier every month. Even though it could not compare to their salary, it was still an income, right? There is no limit to the number of people in the embroidered uniform guard. They will temporarily be military positions, and each official can only have one son. Once there is a vacancy in the Northern Frontier's military system and there is no one below them who can be directly promoted, the embroidered uniform guard members can lower their ranks and directly take over the vacant position. Similarly, after this person has worked for 60 years, their children can still work in the embroidered uniform guard. Lin Yuan's next words soon caused Li Zhong to sink into deep thought. The northern frontier might be pushing new policies, but the power of the military would always be indispensable. Being a Baihu in the northern frontier's military system was much more important than being a high-ranking official in the prince's mansion at the northern frontier. Just the fact that they could directly lower their ranks and take over a military position without having to wait for an evaluation was enough to attract countless people to join the embroidered uniform guard. The embroidered uniform guard did not recruit outsiders. They only accepted the children of officials who had worked for 60 years in the prince's mansion at the northern frontier. Besides, the higher the rank of the father, the higher the rank of the son in the embroidered uniform guard. At that time, the lower the rank of the son in the embroidered uniform guard, the higher the rank of the son in the embroidered uniform guard. Not only did this solve the problem of the officials in the northern frontier being ambitious to secure their positions as military officials, these officials would also conduct strict training for their children, which could be considered as solving the problem of talent. Similarly, only the officials who had worked for the prince's mansion at the northern frontier until they retired could enjoy the benefits of having a son in the embroidered uniform guard. It also solved the problem of the officials in the northern frontier not doing any work and even thinking about quitting to do business. Killing 3 birds with 1 stone. It seemed that there was more to it. Also, the embroidered uniform guard can't be considered a government office in name only. I plan to split the embroidered uniform guard into 2 departments, one in the light and one in the dark. The light department will be independent of the local government and will be in charge of the safety of the gathering place. They will be in charge of arresting and interrogating. However, the criminals will still be sent to the prison set up by the local government. The dark department was responsible for investigation, supervision, and collecting intelligence from both sides during wartime. They were also responsible for monitoring the integrity of the local officials. They were also responsible for monitoring each other with the secret agents of the Association of the Demon Emperor. They were responsible for ensuring that what the Northern Frontier Prince's residents heard and saw was not what some people wanted the Northern Frontier Prince's residents to hear and see. The embroidered uniform guards only need to answer to me and the King of the Northern Frontier. As for the others, no matter what position or identity they have on the northern frontier, as long as they have evidence, they can send the embroidered uniform guards to arrest them. Lin Yuan let out a sigh of relief, but his eyes shone brightly. Ding Zai's manipulation of the Association of the Demon Emperor to block his vision had taught him a lesson. Although the secret agents of the Association of the Demon Emperor were everywhere in the northern frontier, once something happened within the Association of the Demon Emperor, Lin Yuan would become a blind existence. However, the northern frontier belonged to the Xinwu dynasty, and the nominal king was Hu Yan. Lin Yuan's territory system could not be used in the northern frontier. Otherwise, he would not have kept so many spies for his own use. As expected of Lord Dragon King. Amazing, amazing. After listening to Lin Yuan's series of ideas, Li Zhong clapped his hands and cheered. After all, once Lin Yuan set up the embroidered uniform guards, his biggest problem would be solved. He could not help but return to his office to record the details of Lin Yuan's idea of the embroidered uniform guards. He would go back and think about it repeatedly to see if he could come up with a better plan. If he could not, he would directly post the announcement of the establishment of the embroidered uniform guards on the bulletin board of the Northern Frontier King's mansion, and then send someone to deliver the letter to the local government. Wait. Just as Li Zhong turned around, Lin Yuan called out to him. After a moment of silence, the smile on Li Zhong's face disappeared. He turned to look at Lin Yuan with a bitter face, cupped his hands and said, "Lord Dragon King, forgive this student for speaking out of turn, but the business tax exemption must not be allowed. Otherwise, I'm afraid another batch of new aristocratic families will be created. Wouldn't the efforts of Lord Dragon King and this student go to waste?" Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong silently, his heterochromatic eyes faintly narrowed. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, Lin Yuan sighed softly and said helplessly, "What is in your head?" Although the aristocratic families today rely on the Northern Frontier King's mansion for survival, people are forgetful. In another 1 or 2 years, the Northern Frontier aristocratic families' interference in the welfare of the common people will be more or less forgotten. At that time, the aristocratic families of the Northern Frontier will be happy again. Indeed. Seeing that Lin Yuan was seriously discussing with him, Li Zhong could not help but think seriously. He quickly nodded and agreed with Lin Yuan. "I've said before that aristocratic families cannot be dealt with cleanly. No matter if it's an official, a rich family, or even you, Li Zhong, they will give birth to their own children and families. After a long time, when they have accumulated enough wealth and resources, they will become a new aristocratic family. That's why I'm willing to give up some benefits to make the aristocratic families work for me willingly. You see, the Northern Frontier is prosperous and rich now, but this is built on the premise that everyone works together. The Northern Frontier Academy is still in the process of being built. Even if I want to promote poor students, I don't have that many poor students to use. Governing the Northern Frontier still depends on the children of the aristocratic families. If I don't give them some benefits, how can they continue to contribute to the development of the Northern Frontier? When the time comes, the officials of the Northern Frontier will hate you and me. No matter how good the government decree is, it will be impossible to carry it out." Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes flickered with a faint light as he continued, "The business tax exemption is different from the land tax exemption. The latter is equivalent to forcing the common people to give their land to the aristocratic families to strengthen the power of the aristocratic families. But the former is different. The former is to attract the aristocratic families to invest more resources to strengthen the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce will then feed the Northern Frontier. As for the calamity you are worried about, ha!" Lin Yuan's final 2 cold laughs instantly shattered Li Zhong's worries. The aristocratic families were the reason why a dynasty was destroyed. This was the reason why Li Zhong viewed the aristocratic families as tigers and wolves. But now, the aristocratic families of the Northern Frontier had lost their land and were like tigers and wolves without claws. Even if they could survive in the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, it was equivalent to Lin Yuan slowly feeding them with meat porridge. When Lin Yuan no longer wanted to feed them, these aristocratic families could only walk the path of starvation. After all, when they had their own land and were armed, they couldn't even defeat Lin Yuan. What could they change in the future? Chapter 427. This student understands. Li Zhong cupped his hands towards Lin Yuan and said with a face full of smiles. This embroidered uniform guard was different from the other government offices without official posts. Right from the start, they were in charge of arresting, punishing, supervising and other important powers. It was most likely not to motivate the officials to improve themselves. After all, although this kind of government office was not a formal establishment, its power was much greater than many formal government offices. If Lin Yuan were to use this government office 60 years later, then it would be impossible for Lin Yuan to defeat two successive kings of the northern frontier without being stained with blood. Therefore, when the embroidered uniform guard was first activated, there would definitely be a group of fierce people who would be transferred in, and they would have to do great things. When he thought of the power of the embroidered uniform guard, Li Zhong could not help but shiver. It was as if he could see the image of the northern frontier in the not-too-distant future. In addition, this king is waiting for you here. There is another task for you to do. Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes did not have the slightest ripple, only quietly staring at Li Zhong. Li Zhong was silent for a moment, then a faint bitter smile suddenly appeared on his face. He said, "Could it be that the Dragon King wants this student to take over the title of King of the Northern Frontier?" Although Li Zhong's face was a bitter smile, but this smile was clearly uglier than crying. First it was Lei Fan, then it was Hu Yan. The two kings of the northern frontier had fallen one after the other. At this stage, although the northern frontier prince's palace was still able to intimidate the various powers in the northern frontier, but it no longer had anything to do with the king of the northern frontier in name. The title of King of the Northern Frontier might not even be as useful as someone that Lin Yuan had casually nominated. Moreover, as the one closest to Lin Yuan's thoughts in the Northern Frontier Prince's palace, Li Zhong naturally knew that everything that Lin Yuan had done was just to pave the way. The Northern Frontier that he wanted was not a family's world. When Lin Yuan allowed the Northern Frontier to develop freely, it was estimated that only the new laws of the Northern Frontier would have authority. Titles like officials, princes, nobles and the like would be useless. At most, they would give their descendants the title of embroidered uniform guard. When that time came, whether there would be a vacancy for them would be a problem. Yes. Lin Yuan did not have the intention to beat around the bush with Li Zhong and nodded his head very calmly. The smile on Li Zhong's face became uglier and uglier, and his voice was almost choked with sobs. "Lord Dragon King, you can't play people like this. Your student, this donkey, can still pull a mill." What Lin Yuan wanted was the northern frontier ruled by law, and not the northern frontier ruled by a king. Just from the word king in the northern frontier, it was clear that from the day this title was issued by the Xinwu dynasty, the existence that inherited this title would not have a good ending. Especially now that the Xinwu dynasty's situation was getting better by the day, when the chaos was quelled, the northern frontier would still have to bow their heads to the Xinwu dynasty. Thus, Lin Yuan's idea of attacking the royal power would become even more intense. After all, in the northern frontier, the words of the northern frontier king did not have much authority. Regardless of whether you were the ruler of a dynasty or an imperial envoy, the result was the same. Whether or not the northern frontier was willing to cooperate depended on whether or not Lin Yuan nodded his head. As for Lin Yuan's authority, sorry, Lin Yuan was not some northern frontier king. He was the Blackwater Dragon King, the legitimate god of the northern frontier conferred by the Xinwu dynasty. At the same time, he was the god of wealth who had absolute control over the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. No matter what identity he had, he was not related to a mortal. When the royal power did not fall behind, Lin Yuan would have a greater say in the northern frontier. After all, whoever did not listen would not be able to eat. This king has thought about it, and the only person who is qualified to be the last northern frontier king is you. However, Lin Yuan did not pay attention to Li Zhong's complaints. Instead, he looked at Li Zhong with a serious face, and his voice became much lower. This student does not want to be a northern frontier king in name only, and even more so, do not want to become a chess piece used by the Xinwu dynasty to check and balance the power of Dragon King Darren. Li Zhong waved his hand at Lin Yuan like a hoodlum and said in a low voice, "If Dragon King Darren wants this student to take over the northern frontier king, why not just give this student a quick death right now? Why let this student suffer that kind of humiliation?" Li Zhong traveled thousands of li to the northern frontier to seek refuge with Lin Yuan. He originally wanted to make a big career out of it. Naturally, it was impossible for him to muddle-headedly take over a noble title that looked very high and mighty, but in reality, would become a stepping stone when his career had just started. He did not come all the way here to humiliate himself and ask for trouble, right? In particular, Li Zhong had already grasped the knack of Lin Yuan's idea. Especially after he started to implement the land clearing project, he did not even need to think to know that Lin Yuan was weaving an impenetrable net. Various yamen, officials, nominal positions, and shifter emperors would form this big net. Under the big net were the people of the northern frontier, and above the big net was Lin Yuan. As long as Lin Yuan did not lose the support of the people, then his every move in the center of the big net would be accurately fed back to the various areas covered by the big net. These yamen, which divided the authority very carefully, seemed to have scattered the authority of the various local yamen, turning the usually awe-inspiring old men into ferocious beasts without claws and fangs. However, it further stabilized the authority of those in the center. The authority of the various departments was divided, and they would often see each other. Even if someone wanted to cause trouble, a sentence could make other people who did not want to be implicated stand up and report him. Moreover, there was the association of shifter emperors and the embroidered uniform guards watching from the side. The young masters of the embroidered uniform guards were eagerly waiting for something to happen to the various yamen officials, so that they could use their connections to fill in the gaps in the various departments. Although the current embroidered uniform guards were only filling in military positions, there were many military positions in the local yamen. Moreover, after filling in the yamen, they would no longer be a member of the embroidered uniform guards. Naturally, they would no longer be restricted by the rules. If they worked hard and achieved some political achievements, wouldn't promotion be just around the corner? Of course, after they filled in, the new embroidered uniform guards and those who did not fill in would also keep a close eye on them. As long as Lin Yuan could clearly control the two forces, the embroidered uniform guards and the association of shifter emperors, the changes in the officialdom of the northern frontier would forever be a virtuous cycle. No one would dare to make a mistake under the watchful eyes of countless people, and would naturally strictly carry out Lin Yuan's orders. This king is not after your life, and definitely not to humiliate you. After the fall of Lei Fan, the authority of the king of the northern frontier had been mostly lost. Otherwise, Hu Yan would not have been so frightened by this king's words that he stayed in Shunning City obediently. Do you think he did not want to go out, or did not dare to go out? Also, the dignity and prestige of the king of the northern frontier had been completely lost under your scheme, Mr. Li. If you go out and ask the people of the northern frontier, when they hear the words King of the Northern Frontier and Hu Yan, who would not spit on the ground? Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes seemed to be able to speak. With a smile, he said in a deep voice, as the person who defeated the villain Hu Yan, Mr. Li, isn't it the most suitable person to take over the Northern Frontier King? Chapter 428. This, Li Zhong opened his mouth and wanted to refute Lin Yuan, but he did not know what to say. Because Hu Yan had colluded with the aristocratic families and wanted to stop the northern frontier prince's mansion from renting out large amounts of ownerless land to the commoners at a low price, he had already been nailed to the pillar of shame. Don't look at how Lin Yuan had placed Hu Yan under house arrest in the northern frontier prince's mansion. This was also to protect the northern frontier prince who did not know his own worth and thought that he could go against Lin Yuan by colluding with the aristocratic families. If Hu Yan was released now without any guards by his side, he would probably be torn to shreds by the angry commoners of the northern frontier. If Lin Yuan did not lay his hands on Hu Yan, the northern frontier prince, Hu Yan could be considered to be crippled, and there would be no place for him in the northern frontier. Therefore, the replacement of the prince of the northern frontier prince could not be the same as the previous two times where Lin Yuan said it would be whoever he wanted. It was easier to explain to the Xinwu dynasty, since it was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. They were still counting on Lin Yuan to send troops to quell the rebellion. Therefore, even if the Hu clan's descendants opened their eyes, this hereditary prince of the northern frontier prince's mansion would not fall into their hands. However, this time, Lin Yuan had to consider the opinions of the commoners of the northern frontier prince. If he did not care and purely supported a newcomer to the position in order to suppress the royal power, this action alone could cause many of the commoners of the northern frontier to flee. No matter what, the Tianwu continent was still a feudal society. Imperial power and royal power could suppress people to death. No matter how Lin Yuan attacked the royal power, it was useless. There would always be some people who would feel that the prince of the northern frontier was the true master of the northern frontier. If they could not see the good side of the prince of the northern frontier, they would very likely give up everything they had in the northern frontier and become refugees to other regions. The Hu clan's descendants were not good enough, they were not good enough, they were not good enough, they were not good enough. After thinking about it, other than Li Zhong, who was now regarded as a hero by the commoners of the northern frontier, Lin Yuan could not think of anyone else who was suitable to be the last prince of the northern frontier. This student is slow-witted, Dragon King, please enlighten me. Li Zhong bowed lightly to Lin Yuan, and the expression on his face finally looked better. Although he was convinced of Lin Yuan's abilities and plans, he was not a 3-year-old child. He was not willing to be the prince of the northern frontier just because Lin Yuan opened his mouth. This was equivalent to being given the title of Marquis. If Lin Yuan could not give him a good explanation, even if he had to risk offending Lin Yuan, he would still have to run away. Even if he could not run away and died, it was better than dying with infamy and humiliation. Hu Yan has already been crippled. Even if I wanted to give him a chance to repent, the commoners and aristocratic families of the northern frontier will not tolerate him. The Hu clan will no longer have a foothold in the northern frontier. Tell me, if the title of Prince of the Northern Frontier were to fall on Hu Yan or the descendants of the Hu clan, would the commoners be convinced? Although in my eyes, the complete disappearance of royal authority from the northern frontier is the most advantageous situation for me in the northern frontier, I cannot deny that the current northern frontier does indeed need a prince of the northern frontier who can stabilize the people's hearts. In the eyes of the commoners of the northern frontier, you are a great hero who did not hesitate to offend the prince of the northern frontier. At this juncture, the commoners are very against Hu Yan. If I casually choose someone to be the prince of the northern frontier, it may not be able to stabilize the people's hearts. On the contrary, it may even incite a revolt. On the contrary, they would rather see a great hero like you ascend to the throne. Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes did not show the slightest fluctuation, as if he did not care about Li Zhong's popularity in the northern frontier. This student is afraid. Li Zhong's mouth was still giving way, but in his heart, he was secretly pondering. The Dragon King in front of him was an existence that anyone dared to scheme against, especially the position of the Prince of the Northern Frontier. In his eyes, it was like a chess piece that could be abandoned at any time. Every stage of the game had its own uses. Once the value was squeezed out, he would not hesitate to crush it. For example, the first Prince of the Northern Frontier, Lei Fan. According to the original intention of the Shenwu dynasty, Hu Yan, as the local tyrant of the northern frontier, was the best candidate to be conferred the title of Prince of the Northern Frontier. After all, Hu Yan had accumulated so many years of wealth in the northern frontier. He also had the Shunning City Garrison Army, the strongest military force in the northern frontier. He was also a member of an aristocratic family. Once he had the support of the Shenwu dynasty, Hu Yan would be able to develop into one of the strongest forces in the northern frontier. However, Lin Yuan had obviously seen the drawbacks of Hu Yan becoming the prince of the northern frontier. He had directly rejected the imperial edict and had even requested for Hu Yan to be conferred the title of Prince of the Northern Frontier. To the Shenwu dynasty, although Lei Fan's foundation was still shallow, he had Shen Lin Jun's reserves in his hands and was not someone who could be easily manipulated. Moreover, his surname was Lei. Naturally, he would be able to obtain the support of the imperial clan court. In addition to the situation of the Shenwu dynasty at that time, even if Lei Qiusheng wanted to fall out with Lin Yuan, there would be countless people below him who would stop him. Thus, Lei Fan was able to replace Hu Yan as the Prince of the Northern Frontier. During the period when Lei Fan was the Prince of the Northern Frontier, he held military power in his hands and had a strong network of connections. He had even looked like he was going to rule the Northern Frontier together with Lin Yuan. However, after the Northern Frontier had stabilized, Lei Fan had gradually become a puppet. The most frightening thing was that although Lei Fan had realized this, he still did not know what kind of situation he was in. Hence, after he had dragged the sects and clans down with him, he had been dealt with by Lin Yuan without being able to put up any resistance. After Lei Fan, the one who had taken over the position was Hu Yan. At first glance, it seemed as though Lin Yuan had changed his tune, slapping himself in the face. But thinking about it carefully, the reason why Hu Yan had not taken over the position back then was all because of Lin Yuan's scheme. Lei Fan was a chess piece that Lin Yuan had used to stabilize the northern frontier. In the end, being able to drag the sects and clans down with him was already an unexpected surprise. However, with Hu Yan's status, Lin Yuan had probably intended for him to drag the aristocratic families down with him right from the start. Then, what did he have that was worthy of Lin Yuan's scheme? By taking over the position of the Prince of the Northern Frontier, you can allow the people of the Northern Frontier to settle down. At the same time, you should also be very clear that in my plan, royal authority does not have any meaning to exist. So, you should be able to see your own position clearly and understand that cooperating with me with all your might is the right way to go. If you were to be like them and have thoughts that you should not have, what kind of ending would you end up in? There is no need for me to remind you. Besides, now that the reputation of the Prince of the Northern Frontier in the Northern Frontier has already dropped to the lowest point, what need do I have to humiliate and suppress you? So, not only will I not suppress you, I will even give you more power, allowing you to become the real Prince of the Northern Frontier in this period of time. And what you have to repay me is to use all your strength to implement the rule of law in the Northern Frontier. When necessary, you will even have to use your own body to test the law and show that the rule of law is greater than royal authority. Lin Yuan seemed as though he did not see the light that was constantly flashing in Li Zhong's eyes as he continued to speak. Chapter 429. The distance between the northern frontier and the imperial capital was definitely not close. However, Lin Yuan only took half a day to send the news to the imperial capital. By the time he received the imperial capital's reply and the imperial edict of appointment, it was already 3 days later. It was not that Lei Qiusheng and Zhang Xiu did not value Lin Yuan, but that the important officials in the court valued Lin Yuan too much. In this short period of 1.5 years, Lin Yuan's name was like a nightmare that shrouded over their heads. It was not only because the northern frontier was getting stronger day by day, but also because Lin Yuan's position was never that of a prince or a noble. Even if he was the Grand Secretary of the imperial cabinet in the Xinwu dynasty, he could not deny that he was a member of an aristocratic family. As for the other aristocratic families and sects, although they had their enemies, they were more of an excellent helper and cover. Only when everyone worked together could they contend against the supreme imperial power and seek benefits for their families. However, after Lin Yuan took over the throne, he immediately began to reform. First, he established the academy in the northern frontier, which was equivalent to destroying the situation where the aristocratic families and sects controlled knowledge and cultivation methods. This allowed the poor children to have the potential to advance. Then, he took over the land and rented it to farmers for farming at a low price and collected taxes. After all, the ownership of the land did not belong to the farmers. Even if they wanted to use the land, they could not do it. Moreover, Lin Yuan's officials and people were there, so why should they curry favor with the aristocratic families? Therefore, the important officials and nobles in the southern frontier were extremely afraid of Lin Yuan's name. If it was not for Lei Qiusheng forbidding them to do anything to the northern frontier, they would have already killed this disaster in the cradle. Lei Qiusheng wanted to use the northern frontier as a test to see the effects of Lin Yuan's new policies. This was already an open secret in the Xinwu dynasty. Although everyone seemed to be harmonious on the surface, countless eyes were secretly watching Lei Qiusheng's every move, afraid that he would imitate the Black Jiao. After all, what the shifter emperor could do, the embroidered uniform guards could do as well. Although those nominal offices were complicated and varied, they were not official organizations. According to the original salary of the Shinwu dynasty, even if the Shinwu dynasty's embroidered uniform guards were 10 times larger than their counterparts in the northern frontier, the Shinwu dynasty could easily support them. Therefore, Lei Qiusheng wanted to replicate the northern frontier's embroidered uniform guards. Of course, if he only followed the strict law enforcement of the northern frontier and the clear division of labor of each department, although many people would lose their source of income, it would not be a serious blow. To put it bluntly, with so many offices in the imperial dynasty, how many of them would be able to eat to their heart's content? The important officials of the Shinwu dynasty were not worried about anything else, but that Lei Qiusheng would imitate the Black Jiao and ask the officials and citizens to abolish their annual tax exemption. He would ask everyone to pay taxes according to the area of their farmland and their output. Even if he could not take back the land under the nobles' names, the imperial dynasty's annual income would increase by 2 to 3 times. Presently, the Shinwu dynasty was in chaos and had suffered countless casualties. Many lands had lost their owners, but it just so happened that the embroidered guard had received Zhang Xiu's orders a long time ago, so they kept a close watch on these lands and didn't give those clans and sects the chance to take over their lands at all. According to Lei Qiusheng's military background, he would not keep these ownerless lands for himself. Most of them were given to the soldiers who had made great contributions, and a small portion was given to the families of the fallen soldiers. However, Lin Yuan's actions in the northern frontier had given Lei Qiusheng a good start. He gave the land in his hands to the commoners to farm, and then gave them a certain tax exemption to attract the commoners to farm. At most, he would spend a bit more money to reward his subordinates, but the annual income from the autumn harvest would be much higher. It was better than giving the land to his subordinates in a one-time deal. At this time, all the officials were present in the throne room of the imperial capital. A red-faced old man wearing a crimson official's robe cupped his hands towards Lei Qiusheng and said in a clear voice, "Your Majesty, please think twice before acting on his request for the Northern Frontier King's position." It hasn't been long, but the Northern Frontier King's position has already changed 3 times. This is a hereditary title, not some cabbage that can be bought from the roadside. It's also not something that the Black Jiao can give to whomever he wants. Lei Qiusheng sat on the dragon throne, coldly sizing up the red-faced old man without saying a word. Seeing that Lei Qiusheng did not respond, the red-faced old man subconsciously frowned and said again, "Your Majesty." Logically speaking, if the emperor raised his own opinion, the officials would have to give an opinion regardless of whether they agreed or not. At this time, the emperor could keep his original opinion, or he could act according to the opinions of the officials. In any case, it was very rare for both sides to agree. After all, both sides had different standpoints. During times of peace, when the emperor's power benefited, the benefits of the aristocratic families would shrink, and vice versa. For example, at this moment, even though he knew what Lin Yuan was scheming, Lei Qiusheng still didn't even frown in the face of the third request for the Northern Frontier King's position to be changed. However, the decree was blocked by the Cabinet Grand Secretary. As the Cabinet Grand Secretary, the red-faced old man believed that no matter if it was a major matter like the appointment of a king or the transfer of a king's position, a reasonable procedure had to be discussed. In the end, after discussing back and forth, the officials actually asked Lei Qiusheng to take back the order and refuse Lin Yuan's request to change the position of king of the northern frontier. It was clear that these officials who were worried that Lin Yuan's position would be threatened could no longer sit still. "Your Majesty." The red-faced old man raised his voice, but he still didn't dare to roar. He only growled. Whether Lei Qiusheng withdrew his decree or not, he should have given him a response at this time. If there was a major matter, the imperial capital would have to discuss it with the cabinet. However, in front of all the officials, Lei Qiusheng directly refused to answer his question. Wasn't this clearly using silence to embarrass him? Beloved official Xia, don't you like to intercept memorials? Don't tell me that you know nothing about the current situation of the imperial capital. Lei Qiusheng suddenly bent down and looked down at the red-faced old man. He said coldly, "The Frost Mirror Empire and the Azure River Empire have close to 10 million troops stationed at the border of our imperial capital. They are eyeing us covetously and have attracted almost 80% of their military strength. At the same time, all the aristocratic families and sects in the east, west, and north have either directly rebelled or secretly funded the rebels. They all want to establish themselves in this chaotic world. If I destroy one today, another will appear tomorrow. Does beloved official Xia know about this? The red-faced old man was stunned when he heard this. He lowered his head guiltily and didn't dare to continue looking at Lei Qiusheng. Chapter 430. The cabinet ministers had the right to read the memorials. Even before Lei Qiusheng read the memorials, they had to read them themselves to ensure that there was nothing that the emperor couldn't know about before handing the memorials to him. Of course, it was completely different for the emperor to know through the embroidered uniform guard and through the memorials. After all, no matter how many secrets the embroidered uniform guard knew, the Xinwu dynasty couldn't legitimately interfere. They could only use the embroidered uniform guard's spies within the Xinwu dynasty to deal with it. To put it bluntly, it was just a dispute in the Jianghu. However, cabinet ministers only had the right to read memorials. When the decree came from Lei Qiusheng's imperial study, the ministers could only follow the instructions on the cover and deliver it to where it should be delivered. They couldn't read a single word inside. After all, that was the emperor's thoughts. Ordinary people didn't have the right to know. The red-faced elder had read Lei Qiusheng's decree and made it known to the entire court. He had clearly violated Lei Qiusheng's taboo. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been left out in the imperial court. This subject knows a little. The red-faced elder resisted the numbness in his scalp and replied in a low voice. Then do you know how many rebels there are in the north, how many there are in the south, and whether the rebels on the east and west are locals or disguised as soldiers from the two dynasties? Does beloved official Xia know these things? Lei Qiusheng raised his brows and asked coldly. This humble subject doesn't know. The red-faced elder shook his head, his eyes dim. There are more than 50 million rebels in the four directions. Every night we clear them out, their numbers will increase. However, my soldiers are currently resisting the attacks of the two dynasties on the east and west. They simply can't free themselves to deal with these rebels. The only person that can be mobilized, Shenlin Jun, has gone to war. During this period of time, he has been fighting in the north and south. The results seem to be quite good, but in my opinion, these battles are King worthless. As Lei Qiusheng spoke, he was so angry that he laughed and said coldly, Official Xia, that good nephew of yours even dares to embezzle Shenlin Jun's provisions and military equipment. How dare he? No wonder my army is getting weaker by the day. It turns out that even the roots are rotten. Hiss. Before Lei Qiusheng could finish his sentence, a series of gasps could be heard in the throne room. The red-faced old man's nephew was the commander-in-chief of the Heavenly Inspire army. He was in charge of supplying the three armies with provisions and armaments. At the same time, he was also the largest strategist department in the Xinwu dynasty. In the early years, the people on duty there were new aides and strategists who had joined Lei Qiusheng before he rose to power. But now, it had become a government office where some people took advantage of their position for personal gain and filled their own pockets. They even dared to embezzle the provisions and armaments of the emperor's personal army. What kind of concept was this? They were greedy and stupid. If it weren't for that good nephew of yours, how could my Shenlin Jun have to find a place to rest and reorganize after losing more than half of his men to a group of rebel soldiers who had been trained for less than half a year? Lei Qiusheng narrowed his eyes slightly and said coldly, if my Shenlin Jun could still fight, why would I count on those two evil creatures, Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuming? Do you think I don't know what it means to raise a tiger and invite calamity? The problem now is, if I don't raise a tiger, how will I deal with the rebel soldiers who are causing chaos everywhere? Will I rely on the benevolence and righteousness that you, Scholar Xia, speak of? Your Majesty, the red-faced old man froze as if he had been struck by lightning. Although he knew that his nephew's hands were not clean, he had never thought that his nephew would be so daring. Who didn't know that Shenlin Jun represented the emperor's personal army in Shenwu Royal County? What was the difference between making a move on Shenlin Jun and directly stealing money from the emperor's treasury? Official Xia, whether you are willing or not, this edict must be delivered to the northern frontier today. Later, I guarantee that your head will be moved along with your nephews. Slapping the dragon throne heavily, Lei Qiusheng stood up and stared coldly at the red-faced old man. His expression was as gloomy as water. There was no suspense as to whether or not the red-faced old man's nephew was stupid. After all, no matter how strong the father's relationship was, it was impossible for an idiot to sneak into the Heaven-Inspire army, which was full of strategists. Therefore, the red-faced old man's nephew embezzling Shenlin Jun's supplies was certainly not as simple as it seemed. At the very least, it was a dereliction of duty. At the very least, it was a crime that could implicate 9 generations of his family. Humph. Snorting coldly, Lei Qiusheng's cold gaze swept across the faces of everyone present. Many of the important officials present were considered to be the trusted aides of Xia Xinghai in the previous dynasty. At that time, they were working for Xia Xinghai while secretly contacting him, all the way until the day his troops arrived. According to Xia Xinghai's original plan, they could at least delay him for 10 days to half a month. At that time, the troops from all over the country would arrive. In the end, those important officials and generals that Xia Xinghai trusted very much naturally opened the gates of the imperial capital and welcomed him and his subordinates into the imperial capital. Now that Shenwu dynasty was in chaos, it was even more chaotic than Wanjian dynasty. If these important officials didn't have any thoughts in their hearts, the person sitting on the dragon throne right now would probably be Xia Xinghai. Everyone, if there is anything else, please quickly report it. If there is nothing else, please dismiss the court. When Lei Qiusheng saw that everyone was silent like cicadas in winter, he directly sat back down on the dragon throne and looked disdainfully at all the officials below. Even if tens of years had passed, these people still wouldn't forget who was the most capable war god of Shenwu dynasty. As long as Lei Qiusheng sat in the imperial capital and didn't move, even if the entire Shenwu dynasty's army was wiped out, they wouldn't doubt that Lei Qiusheng had a trump card that could turn the situation around. After these tens of years of purging, the entire Shenwu dynasty's subjects were clear about one thing. Anyone who went against Lei Qiusheng was now buried under the earth. As the price for the important official's concession, Lei Qiusheng's investigation of his subordinates who were suspected of colluding with the enemy stopped abruptly at Scholar Xia's nephew. An imperial edict appointing Li Zhong as the new king of the northern frontier was also quickly sent out of the imperial capital. This couldn't be said to be a complete concession. After all, although the Heavenly Inspire Army's commander-in-chief wasn't a low rank and was a position that all generals had to curry favor with, to put it bluntly, he was just a high-ranking quartermaster. Even if Lei Qiusheng eliminated him, it wouldn't cause an uproar in the military headquarters, and it wouldn't implicate any important figures that even he found troublesome. However, once Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuming reached an agreement with him and started to send troops to wipe out the rebels in the north and south, the situation would be completely stabilized. Also, the 2 dynasties that wanted to take a big bite of meat but didn't want to fight to the death would also pack up and retreat. After this period of time, I will settle accounts with all of you one by one. Lei Qiusheng silently lowered his head, the cold light in his eyes seemed to be somewhat penetrating. Chapter 431. The situation in the northern frontier was changing, and the undercurrent was surging in the imperial capital. At this stage, the rebel army in the northern frontier was terrified. Every day, they were worried that Shenlin Jun would kill his way to their doorstep. In the end, while Shenlin Jun was still stationed in the south, they were waiting for another wave of death. The arrival of the 300,000 southern expedition immediately frightened the rebel army in the city. When the defenders on the city wall saw the densely packed southern expedition with bright armor outside the city, they were so scared that they almost couldn't hold their weapons steadily. Although there were many rebel forces in the northern frontier, everyone knew that the true leader of the northern frontier was the Black Jiao who controlled the military and politics of the northern frontier with the body of a demon beast. Only the Black Jiao was the legitimate existence appointed by the Xinwu dynasty. Although the Xinwu dynasty was now rising everywhere, and rebel armies were appearing one after another, there weren't many rebels who really wanted to be the emperor. They just wanted to take advantage of this chaotic world to lay a foundation for their descendants. Especially after the northern frontier broke away from the control of the Xinwu dynasty, the Blackwater Dragon King was conferred by the Xinwu dynasty with the title of Northern Frontier King and Blackwater Dragon King, which made countless people envious. Things in the world were often like this. They seemed to only see the current glory of Lin Yuan, but forgot that when Lin Yuan was in control of the northern frontier, the Xinwu dynasty's first reaction was to transfer troops from the coastal battlefield in the southern frontier and merge them with the Xiongwu army to suppress Lin Yuan. The commanders said that we have to take this city before the sun sets. Tonight, we will spend the night in the city. Li Zhongxing's bodyguard pulled on the reins, and the horses under him reared up. The neighing of the horses and the voices of the people mixed together, but his every word was accurately transmitted to the frontline soldiers' ears. Kill! The 300,000 Southern Expedition soldiers following Li Zhongxing raised their weapons and roared in unison. The city in front of them was not large, but it was actually the largest group of rebels near the northern frontier. They occupied 4 cities under their rule. In terms of territory and military strength, they were stronger than the 6 border cities. However, compared to the northern frontier, which had been hiding their strength for more than 4 months, they were still ants that could be easily crushed. Li Zhongxing rode on his warhorse. His eagle-like eyes landed on the city wall in front of him as he shouted, "Boys, kill!" This group of rebel soldiers looked like they could not withstand a single blow, but in the face of such a powerful northern frontier army, they were only scared. They did not give up the defense line because of their low morale. The 2 sides were in a deadlock for the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Li Zhongxing did not even see a single deserter. In his heart, he had already raised his evaluation of the enemy's general by several levels. However, this did not stop Li Zhongxing from taking the city. Ever since he came out of seclusion, he had never thought that he would lose. All he was thinking about was how to win beautifully. Following the commander's command, the soldiers who had been waiting for a long time immediately roared and charged, aiming their weapons at the city wall. Fight! Those who retreat, behead. Also, if you take the head of a northern frontier soldier, you can exchange it with me for 5 taels of silver. On the city wall, a bald man in his 30s with a mustache rubbed his head and carried a heavy machete on his shoulder. There was not even a trace of fear in his eyes. With the city wall as a buffer zone, the 2 armies clashed head-on. In an instant, swords flashed and arrows rained down like locusts. Siege weapons were placed on top of the city wall. Shiny blades were drawn from their sheaths. Boiling fighting spirit and loud shouts began to reverberate around the city. The southern expedition went down south from the checkpoint set up in Shunning City. As soon as they came out of the checkpoint, they divided into 4 groups and went straight to the few groups of rebels closest to the northern frontier. They almost took down 3 groups of rebels in the first day. Although the remaining group resisted tenaciously, everyone could see that they were like arrows at the end of their flight. If it was not because it was difficult to attack the city after dark, it was estimated that the next day would be the last struggle of this group of rebels. The strength of the southern expedition's fighting strength was obviously beyond many people's expectations. They were able to take down 4 groups of rebels in the first day. Moreover, this was because the southern expedition spent most of their time on the road. Even Lei Qiusheng's Shenlin Jun did not dare to say that he could directly divide his troops to attack several groups of rebels at the same time and win. The news of the northern frontier sending troops to suppress the rebels quickly spread throughout the Xinwu dynasty. It could be said that some people were happy and some were sad. The happy ones were the orthodox group of the Xinwu dynasty headed by Lei Qiusheng. After all, they knew their own situation. When Shenlin Jun left the imperial capital, he was still awe-inspiring. However, not to mention that he was unable to fight again, it was obviously impossible for him to sweep away the rebels like before. As the former god of war and god of war, Lei Qiusheng quickly ordered Shen Lin Jun to stay put and rest. He quietly waited for the movements of the northern frontier and Qingpeng. This was because he believed that no matter what Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuming were thinking, they would not let go of such a good opportunity. Even if he had to sell the foundation that he had painstakingly built to the Xinwu dynasty, he would have to sell it for a good price, right? As for the rebels, in Lei Qiusheng's eyes, they were even less of a problem. In the past, it was difficult for him to seize the opportunity to reshuffle the cards of the Xinwu dynasty. This time, they stretched out their necks to be cut. Lei Qiusheng had even less reason to let them go. If it was not for the fact that he could not mobilize the military forces in his hands, why would he have to lower his head and try to rope in Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuming? Lei Qiusheng was very clear that although the Xinwu dynasty was in chaos, the rebels outside still did not dare to go too far. Especially when Lei Qiusheng still had a card in his hand that had not been played yet. Even if they had 10 times the courage, they would not dare to act recklessly. However, once Shen Lin Jun's undefeatable banner fell, the rebels would not just simply cause chaos in their own territory. There was no guarantee that many of them would immediately lead their troops to attack the imperial capital. They would take this opportunity to set their sights on the supreme throne. Therefore, Lei Qiusheng would rather stop Shen Lin Jun's advance and let the rebels continue to jump around than let Shen Lin Jun take the risk of ruining his own undefeatable signboard. Although Lei Qiusheng's actions made countless discerning people see the weakness of the giant beast that was the Xinwu dynasty, Shen Lin Jun had not been completely annihilated. Even if they had any thoughts, they did not have the guts to be the first to stand out. At most, they would occupy a few territories and wait for the imperial edict to be issued. After all, there were so many rebels in the Xinwu dynasty. Even if Lei Qiusheng was known as the Eternal Emperor, he had to understand that the law could not punish the masses. If he really offended the aristocratic families in the world, even if the Xinwu dynasty was in a precarious state, they could easily overturn the entire Xinwu dynasty if they worked together. Chapter 432. Of course, whether the country could be saved or not depended on Lei Qiusheng's methods. It also depended on whether Lei Qiusheng's sons and grandsons had the ability to suppress the heroes. Even if Lei Qiusheng's might was unparalleled and could suppress the world's aristocratic families, it was impossible for Lei Qiusheng to wipe out all the aristocratic families. When Lei Qiusheng died of old age, how long could his sons and grandsons last under the watchful eyes of the wolves? Don't forget, the Xinwu dynasty didn't get the country righteously. Even if the country was taken away, it was because the sons and grandsons didn't have the ability. But these were all things that the Xinwu dynasty had to consider. It had nothing to do with the southern expedition that was currently attacking the rebels on the northern frontier. Because of the problem of their birth, these wolf cubs raised in the northern frontier were usually brave and fierce. Now that there was no invasion of demon beasts, they were usually bored to death in the northern frontier. Now that they were pulled out to quell the rebellion, they were all trying their best to wrestle with the rebels in the south. But in the end, they were greatly disappointed. They even felt that it was better to practice martial arts in their own camps. The backbone of the rebel army formed by the aristocratic families and sects were either disciples or family soldiers. Usually, there was no difference between them. In terms of cultivation, they were even higher than the southern expedition. But as the old saying goes, in the face of a real war, the individual strength below the Kongming realm could influence a part of the battlefield, but it couldn't change the direction of the whole war. Even for the Heaven Dipper realm cultivators, the aura energy in their bodies and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth seemed to be circulating endlessly, but there was a limit to the endurance of the body. Once this limit was exceeded, even if the enemy didn't attack, the body would collapse on its own. Therefore, on the battlefield, what was relied on was the ability of the commander-in-chief and the tacit understanding and obedience of the frontline soldiers. After the first day of the war, there was no lack of rebel generals dying in battle, and the entire battlefront directly collapsed. If such a defeat fell into the eyes of fierce generals like Li Zhongsheng and Zhang Qilin, it was simply an unforgivable sin. Any troops that directly retreated because of the death of their generals, even if they weren't immediately punished by military law, would have to peel off a layer of skin when they returned to the camp. As for becoming a deserter and becoming a bandit, that was even more impossible. Currently, rebel armies were running rampant everywhere in the dynasty. The small and medium-sized mountain bandits, roving bandits, and Xiangma had either become rebel warlords under the support of various aristocratic families or been annexed or annihilated by various rebel armies. Even if Li Zhongxing did not find trouble with them, they would not be able to find a place to stand in the current Xinwu dynasty. On the other hand, the southern expedition, who had undergone strict military training, even if the general in charge of the grassroots command died in battle, as long as there was no sound of beating the gong, it would not hinder their tide-like offensive. The general died in the position of lieutenant, and the lieutenant died in the position of Qianhu. Compared to the collapse of the rebel army's front line after the death of their general, the southern expedition hoped that their immediate superior would die in battle. After all, when the superior died, it was time for the subordinates to replace him. After a battle, it was not rare for a soldier to be directly promoted to a deputy general. Of course, this was a bonus that only happened during the war. If it was during peacetime, it would not matter if the superior died, but the subordinates who could replace him would depend on the individual's ability and the results of their daily training. Especially when they heard about the establishment of the genie guards before they set off, they were even more enthusiastic about taking advantage of this war to rise up the ranks. After all, if they could not be promoted now, there would be plenty of people to fight for their jobs in the future. However, under the incentive of this promotion model, it did not mean that a general could sit at the rear and watch the generals and soldiers below rush forward dauntlessly. Li Zhongxing had set up a supervision team early in the morning. Other than the generals and military advisors, no matter what military rank they had, once the military order was given, they had to lead the people to rush forward. The person with the highest position had to be at the front. If the person behind did not stop, they had to continue to rush forward. When you arrived, the person behind you would take over your position and continue to rush forward. The rebel armies that fought against the southern expedition had only one feeling after a day of fighting. This group of wolf cubs from the northern frontier were really King unafraid of death. At night. General, all the battle reports have been sent here. The guard placed the 3 parchments on Li Wenzhong's desk. He then cupped his hands and stood to one side to wait upon Li Wenzhong. The rebel armies that they fought along the way were not newbies. Although the local aristocratic families raised the army, the composition of the officers in the army was different from those aristocratic families who stuffed their juniors into the army for gilding. They were all veterans from various armies. Their obedience to orders and training requirements in all aspects were also close to that of the regular army. They could be considered as one of the stronger rebel armies in the northern frontier. But even so, the soldiers trained by the retired officers and the soldiers trained by Shen Lin Jun's reserve officers were still 2 different things. In addition, this city was close to Shunning City, so it was not threatened by the demon beasts. There were no troops from other dynasties nearby, so the city's defense ability was almost 0. It was only a little better than the current situation of the northern frontier without a city wall. After all, the 6 border cities were the first line of defense, and Shunning City was the second line of defense. If Shunning City was breached, then the demon beasts would be able to drive straight to the Wei River. Only then would they be blocked by the 3rd line of defense of the Xinwu dynasty with the help of the Wei River. Once Shunning City was breached, it would be equivalent to a land of death. It was originally used as a place to live, so there was no need to spend a lot of money to build city defense fortifications. Of course, even if it was built, there was no possibility of it being used. After all, in the past few decades, the demon beasts in the Hengduan Mountains had only suppressed the original Zhongshan City. They had not even crossed Zhongshan City, let alone breaching Shunning City. It was not until the appearance of Lin Yuan that the situation of the demon beasts struggling at death's door in the Hengduan Mountains was broken. The first round of assault organized by Li Zhongxing did not take down the city wall, because the wall, which was 30 to 40 feet high and completely made of stone, could not withstand the first round of assault at all. It was directly broken into pieces. After that, it was the bloody close combat. Although the combat strength of this rebel army was not weak, compared with the southern expedition that Li Zhongxing had almost trained as an imperial army, they were not even a little bit better. Even though their cultivation was high and their numbers were comparable, they only gave the southern expedition a head-on blow at the beginning of the battle. As the two sides were entangled and anxious, the balance of victory had been tilting towards the southern expedition. These bastards are all here to show off. Li Zhongxing did not even look at the 3 battle reports on the desk. He stretched himself and said in a deep voice, "I won't look at the specific written reports. You just need to tell me the general situation. If there is no problem, retouch the 4 battle reports and send them back to the northern frontier." Chapter 433. The bodyguard nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "Those bastards aren't just showing off. Apart from us, the other 3 armies have more or less suffered losses. In total, they have lost 20% of their men and wasted countless siege weapons. Those bastards who came to deliver the letter even asked me to intercede on their behalf, asking the marshal not to punish them. The victory at the beginning was indeed commendable, but it could also be divided into great victories and tragic victories." Lin Yuan asked Li Zhong to conquer the entire north instead of eliminating the rebels near the northern frontier. If he failed at the beginning, even if Lin Yuan didn't punish him, Zhang Qilin wouldn't laugh at him, and Li Zhongxing would be too ashamed to show his face in the future. Therefore, it was necessary to save men. Otherwise, if he couldn't conquer the north, he would have no place to replenish his men if he lost the southern expedition. The northern battlefront army on the northern frontier and the new army under the banner of the Fallen Star Army were all waiting to be fed. Wasn't it obvious that Lin Yuan sent him out at this time? Although Zhang Qilin and Li Zhongxing were each in charge of an army, they were both from Shinlin Jun. In this situation, they naturally worked for Lin Yuan. However, when Lin Yuan and Lei Qiusheng were competing, Lin Yuan couldn't use the officers of the imperial army to control his own troops, could he? Was he tired of living? Was he tired of living? After thinking for a while, Li Zhongxing shook his head with a chuckle and said, "These bastards are usually arrogant. Now that they are out for training, of course, they don't want to lose. In addition, it is their first time on the battlefield. They are eager to make contributions, so it is understandable that they choose radical tactics. Besides, if they only count the losses, do they have the courage to send me the battle report? Don't play any tricks." Ha ha ha. The personal guard let out a few hollow laughs. He didn't feel embarrassed at all because his prank was exposed. He continued, "Marshal, it's true that we have lost 20% of our 1,300,000 brothers. But, if we add up the surrendered soldiers that we have taken in, our total number hasn't decreased, but has increased instead. In fact, we are approaching the 2 million mark. How could there be no deaths in a war?" However, a truly capable general could always increase the number of troops under his command as the war progressed. Now, not only had they won the first battle, the number of troops under their command had increased by 2/3. This was naturally a joyous occasion. In the end, as soon as the soldier finished reporting the good news, he realized that Li Zhongxing's expression had instantly turned gloomy. The smile on his face had also instantly stiffened. He did not know what he had said wrong to make this living king of hell unhappy. "I asked you to incorporate the surrendered soldiers, not to be assimilated by them. Fight according to this plan. After another 2 or 3 cities, I will bring my men to crusade against these bastards." Li Zhongxing glanced at his guard and scolded, "Tell those bastards to immediately reorganize their troops and cut down the surrendered soldiers. Kick out all those crooked people with bad records." Good heavens! After the first battle, the number of troops had doubled. If something went wrong later, who would be responsible? After the first battle, they still had to continue to push forward and incorporate the surrendered soldiers for their own use. It wasn't like they were going to drag them back to the northern frontier to slowly train and correct the bad habits of the surrendered soldiers. Had those bastards never thought that if the surrendered soldiers in their own troops had the same number or even more than the main troops, how would they end up with an explosion or a mutiny? Yes, yes. I will go and remind them right away. After being scolded by Li Zhongsheng, the guards seemed to have woken up from a dream. A layer of cold sweat even appeared on his forehead. Only then did Li Zhongsheng nod his head, and a gloomy expression flashed across his face. He suddenly realized that Lin Yuan seemed to have dug a big hole for him. 3 million Southern Expedition soldiers was indeed a lot. The number of soldiers was enough for him to directly divide his troops and attack several rebel armies at the same time. However, even if these 3 million soldiers could fight all the way from the northern frontier to the Wei River, it was impossible for them to occupy all the territories in the north. If he wanted to control the territories in the north, he could only use the surrendered soldiers. However, the surrendered soldiers' military discipline was one thing, and the surrendered soldiers' loyalty was another. He wasn't sincerely trying to conquer the world for Lin Yuan. Although he was still in a dilemma, he still had to choose between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiusheng. If they were the recruits that he had personally trained, he would be able to execute all orders with a single order. When the time came, they would defect to the Xinwu dynasty or continue to listen to Lin Yuan's orders. It would all depend on who they wanted to follow. However, when the number of surrendered soldiers far exceeded the original southern expedition, it was hard to say what would happen. The rebel army had already shed all pretense of cordiality with the Xinwu dynasty. They only cared about their own interests and didn't care about the empire's reputation. Throughout the entire Xinwu dynasty, before the southern sea route was opened, only the northern frontier could export feies from the Hengduan mountain range and trade with the other 6 empires. The Xinwu dynasty was in chaos, and it could be said that almost every region was losing money. The front lines needed to be replenished, the equipment needed to be changed, the soldiers needed to be fed, and the deceased soldiers needed to be compensated. After the war, the various regions needed to restore civil administration, which was still a huge expense. Currently, the only place that earned money in the entire Xinwu dynasty was the northern frontier and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. It was all thanks to Lei Qiusheng's decades of hard work that they were able to maintain the chaos and not collapse. Who could give more benefits than Lin Yuan? The entire Xinwu dynasty was speechless. No matter how great the future was, it was useless. The other party had already rebelled. If they couldn't obtain any benefits, who would be willing to care about them? Thinking of this, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on Li Zhongsheng's forehead. He felt as if he had been killed by Lin Yuan. There was a sharp blade flashing on his head. As long as he had the thought of betraying Lin Yuan, he and the southern expedition would immediately vanish. He had separated his subordinates and assigned them to be the leaders of the surrendered soldiers. Once they rebelled, they would definitely be unable to control the situation. At that time, they might not even be able to protect a part of the battlefield. However, if he gathered his subordinates together, they could only protect a part of the battlefield. When the Fallen Star Army came out of the northern frontier, the Fallen Star Army would deal with him the same way he had dealt with the rebel army. As one of the bodyguards of the 2 great generals of the Wanjian dynasty, the Fallen Star Army's training skills were no worse than Shenlin Jun's. He was now in a dilemma. If he couldn't grasp the proper measure of the expedition to the north, he would die. If he hesitated, he would still die. Unless he could really fully satisfy Lin Yuan's wishes and steadily hand over the entire north to him and watch him and the Xinwu dynasty divide the river to rule, only then would he be able to get a good end. Chapter 434. The northern frontier had sent troops to suppress rebels, and this year's taxes had already begun to be delivered to the imperial capital. The Black Jiao, who controlled the northern frontier, could shake hands with the divine martial emperor and make peace. It could be said that this was a happy ending for everyone. Of course, not everyone was happy. For example, the nobles in the imperial capital were worried that if Lin Yuan's new policies were successfully implemented in the northern frontier, then Lei Qiusheng would naturally have no reason to let them go. Soon, Lei Qiusheng would follow the example of the northern frontier and wield a butcher's knife against the nobles and nobles. The rebels in the northern frontier were not worried, because as the southern expedition had advanced in the past few days, dozens of rebel forces had been swallowed up by Li Zhongsheng. They did not see Li Zhongsheng really forcing anyone into a corner. Instead, after screening the surrendered troops, the elites were incorporated into the southern expedition and began the next phase of the journey. Therefore, many rebels in the northern frontier had lost the will to fight, and before the southern expedition came to attack, they had all surrendered to Li Zhongsheng's territory. In any case, they were waiting for the Xinwu dynasty to quell the chaos before incorporating them. Now that there was an even thicker thigh to rely on, they naturally would not miss it. As for Lin Yuan's side, although Lei Qiusheng was worried that Lin Yuan would take the opportunity to control the entire northern frontier, Lei Qiusheng was not worried that Lin Yuan could cross the Wei River and threaten his imperial capital. When the rebellion was quelled, he only needed to issue an imperial edict. If Lin Yuan was not willing to hand over his territory, then he could directly label him as a rebel and punish him. When the time came, the Xinwu dynasty's troops would all come together, and this group of newly recruited soldiers would not be able to resist. Therefore, generally speaking, Lei Qiusheng fully supported Lin Yuan's decision to send troops to quell the rebellion. If one had to pick out a person who was the most unhappy, then it should be the Azure Canopy King, Lei Qiuming, who acted like a tyrant in the south. During this period of time, Lei Qiuming had not been idle. He had swallowed up the rebel armies in the south to expand his influence. In addition, he had over 300,000 regular soldiers as the backbone. Whether it was the progress of the army's training or their combat strength, they far surpassed the rebel armies. Even Lin Yuan's northern frontier army could not compare to Lei Qiuming in terms of elites. Of course, even if Lei Qiuming had a lot of troops under his command, he did not dare to casually send out over 1 million troops like Lin Yuan to quell the rebel armies around him. His main goal was to persuade them to surrender and use force as a supplement to deal with the rebel armies in the south. Although the development was slow, Lei Qiuming did not have the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. The Dragon Palace of the Four Seas would not give him face and allow him to open up the sea route for trade. He had so many people under him to feed and eat. Even if he did not move, it would be a huge expense. Therefore, compared to Lin Yuan who wanted to take the opportunity to swallow up the entire northern frontier, Lei Qiuming did not think that he could take over the southern frontier. He wanted to join forces with Lin Yuan to attack the imperial capital in the northern and southern frontier, and remove the divine martial emperor from his throne. A single penny stumped a hero. This saying was most apt when it came to Lei Qiuming. However, even if he could not swallow up the entire southern frontier, it was not a problem to take the opportunity to expand his influence and territory. When the Xinwu dynasty's lobbyist came, there were no small or medium-sized rebel armies left in the southern frontier. There were only a dozen or so rebel armies left. They were all ruthless people with millions of troops. Lei Qiuming, who had a large number of regular soldiers in his army, was the strongest. Lei Qiuming had originally planned to slowly negotiate with the Xinwu dynasty to see what kind of price he could sell the foundation he had built. If the Xinwu dynasty offered too little, Lei Qiuming did not mind going one step further and even going straight for the imperial capital. However, before Lei Qiuming could state the bottom line in his heart, the great eunuch who represented the Xinwu dynasty in front of him suddenly gave him a crazy price. Prince Qingpeng has really shot himself in the foot this time. The great eunuch Tong Guan's lips curled up slightly. His fair and clean face did not hide his smile at all. He said in a deep voice, "You are still hesitating on what price to use to close the deal. The one in the northern frontier can no longer hold back and has begun to send troops to suppress those who do not submit." Lei Qiuming almost crushed the teacup in his hand into powder. He did not take the opportunity to respond to Tong Guan's words. However, his eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that Lei Qiuming's mood was not very calm at this moment. Therefore, the conditions that this servant previously discussed with Prince Qingpeng are no longer valid. Tong Guan shrugged and said in a shrill voice, "It is not that this servant does not want to give face to Prince Qingpeng. It is just that those people in the capital have been slandering the emperor recently. They said that as long as the Black Jiao of the northern frontier takes action, the rebellion in the northern frontier will definitely be quelled. The imperial court only needs to endure for a while more before they can mobilize troops to clean up the rebels in the southern frontier. It is just an evil beast. Does it really think that it is a famous general? Prince Qing Peng's gaze landed on Tong Guan. He said with a dark face, just those child soldiers of the northern frontier want to quell the rebellion? It is just that those families in the northern frontier know when to stop and do not have the intention to bicker with the Black Jiao. If those families want to make a move, look at the troops of the northern frontier and see if they will immediately turn into ashes. Speaking of this, Lei Qiuming paused and hissed, Eunuch has been with this king for half a month. Don't you know the situation in the southern frontier? These rebels in the southern frontier are not so easy to deal with. The moment he finished speaking, Tong Guan's expression froze. There was even a trace of gloominess in his eyes. The rebels in the northern frontier took advantage of the chaos and did not have the intention of pulling down Lei Qiusheng from the throne. They only wanted to take advantage of this chaotic world to let their descendants enter the military system of the Shenwu dynasty. If they could be conferred a few more titles, it would be satisfactory. Naturally, when Lin Yuan's troops arrived, all the rebels surrendered at the sight of the wind. No one was a fool. Of course, they were not willing to use their children's lives to obtain a chance to get close to the throne. Without that foundation, even if they sat on the throne, would they be able to sit steadily? However, the southern frontier was different. The rebels in the southern frontier had their own ideas. The southern frontier of the Shenwu dynasty was coastal. Even though there were countless unknown dangers in the sea, the safe sea route that had been opened up was enough for the southern merchants of the Shenwu dynasty to trade with the three empires and various overseas powers. Although this sea route could not be compared to the northern frontier that could directly communicate with the other 6 empires, it was still a legitimate treasure bowl. The rebellion of the southern frontier was fake. The real reason was to take the opportunity to eliminate their competitors. These people were not easy to deal with. If they did not obtain enough benefits, they would not relent. Chapter 435. Azure Cape King, aren't you exaggerating a bit? Tong Guan narrowed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, although the southern aristocratic families are more troublesome than the northern ones, they don't have the guts to go against His Majesty. If Azure Cape King thinks that you can use the southern rebel army to advance your position in the imperial court, or even to raise bandits in Azure Cape, then you are gravely mistaken. Speaking up to this point, Tong Guan raised his hand towards the upper left side, cupped his fist towards the air, and said in a high-pitched voice, a while ago, the envoys from the Blue River Empire and the Frost Mirror Empire came to our Shenwu royal capital, and asked His Majesty to give them the territories and people they had conquered. They also asked His Majesty to select a few princesses, infanta, and a group of beautiful young girls to be sent to their empires. Cold sweat began to appear on Lei Qiuming's forehead. He and Lei Qiusheng were blood brothers. Ever since they were young, he had never seen through his temperamental brother. No matter how much advantage you had in your hands, as long as you wanted to use these advantages to pressure him and slowly suck his marrow, then even if his brother was beaten to a pulp, he would still bite off a piece of flesh from you. The Azure River and Frost Mirror empires didn't have the absolute advantage, but their armies could be said to be invincible. Although their armies could resist the attacks of the two empires, their own defensive lines were also moving back day by day. If this continued, more and more Shenwu dynasty's territories would fall, and the demands of the two empires would become more and more excessive. Even this couldn't make Lei Qiusheng bow his head, let alone the southern rebels who were nothing in Lei Qiusheng's eyes. Eunuch, you can't say it like that. Lei Qiuming sighed and said, this king controls the southern army like holding a piece of fat meat in his hand. No matter how you look at it, there will always be a little oil on it. That's why this king's army is well equipped and has plenty of provisions. However, have you ever thought about the fact that the other 13 rebel armies also have millions of soldiers? The various aristocratic families naturally have plenty of provisions, but where did their equipment come from? As his voice fell, Tong Guan's face suddenly turned deathly pale. This was a deadly question. These rebels claimed that their equipment was obtained from raiding the city's armory, but these words could only deceive the common people. Although the south was close to the territory of the dragon clan of the Four Seas, the sea monsters were not interested in land and would rarely come ashore to harass them. Therefore, although there were troops stationed in the south, there were not many of them. This was also the reason why the south fell almost instantly when the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas rebelled. How many weapons and armors could there be in the armory when there weren't even many garrisons? If it were just a few million people who were fully equipped and had an abundance of rations, it would still be understandable. But those nobles in the imperial capital naturally wouldn't choose just one company to bet on. With Lin Yuan's example, everyone wanted to monopolize the profits from the sea route. This was why the tens of millions of rebels in the south looked no different from a regular army at first glance. If Lei Qiusheng wanted to pursue this matter, heads would roll in the imperial capital. Even the generals in charge of military supplies in the Heavenly Inspire army would not be able to escape responsibility. The first to lose their heads would be them. Once his nephew in the Heavenly Inspire army died, there was no way Grand Secretary Xia would let a small eunuch like him off. If the Azure Cape King insisted on pursuing this matter, who knew how many of those nobles in the imperial capital would be killed? Those who survived might not have the courage to oppose Lei Qiuming, but wouldn't it be easy for them to deal with a little eunuch like him? Seeing Tong Guan's expression change, Lei Qiuming raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. He said in a low voice, "Don't worry, eunuch. This matter is actually easy to explain. As long as eunuch can produce evidence and push the blame of the equipment and rations to those evil cultists in the south, it will be fine. When the time comes, those nobles in the imperial capital will cheer for eunuch. Even if His Majesty wants to pursue this matter, he won't be able to use his own people as an example. Furthermore, eunuch can use this matter to form a good relationship with the nobles in the imperial capital. Won't you be able to do whatever you want in the future?" Hearing this, Tong Guan's 6 gods, who were about to lose their master, immediately returned to their positions. He looked at Lei Qiuming with a face full of hope. Seeing that the big fish had taken the bait, Lei Qiuming sneered in his heart. However, on the surface, he sighed softly and changed the topic. But no one knows whether or not the evil cultists participated in this matter. Their actions are also secretive. Before their identities are exposed, no one knows who is related to the evil cultists. Or perhaps they themselves are evil cultists. Even this king, a vassal of the south, doesn't have much confidence in finding these evil cultists. "Eunuch, can you find evidence?" As his voice fell, the hope on Tong Guan's face slowly disappeared and was replaced by a cold smile. To be able to take on the same mission as Zhang Xiu, Tong Guan's ability and loyalty weren't inferior to Zhang Xiu's. Otherwise, Lei Qiusheng wouldn't have let him persuade his own brother, who was the first to rebel, to submit to the imperial court. In the beginning, after being tricked by Lei Qiuming, Tong Guan was only slightly flustered. After all, he was only a eunuch. Whether he could accomplish anything depended on whether the emperor trusted them or not. If the crowd was agitated and the surviving nobles accused him of being a treacherous eunuch, even if Lei Qiusheng knew that these nobles were taking revenge, he would still be happy to hand him over to appease the crowd's anger. His mission was originally to negotiate with King Qingpeng, but after a few words from King Qingpeng, he already felt that he was standing beside an abyss. If he wasn't careful, he would directly fall in and end up with his body smashed to pieces. But when Lei Qiuming continued speaking, Tong Guan realized that from the beginning, Lei Qiuming had never thought of helping him push the blame on the evil cult. This matter was just a matter of responsibility. It was also a territory that Lei Qiuming held in his hands to fight for benefits for himself. With him, the King Qingpeng, who controlled the southern military and politics, not to mention that the evil cult wouldn't be honest, even if they really didn't participate in this matter, he could still think of a way to pin the blame on the evil cult. If this matter was done well, heads would roll from the imperial capital to heads rolling in the south. It was just that the target of people's hatred would change from him, Tong Guan, to King Qingpeng. However, if someone were to hold a grudge against him, he would die without a complete corpse in less than half a year. However, if someone were to hold a grudge against the Azure Canopy King, then even if those aristocratic families, nobles, and sects of the south were tied together, they could only swallow their broken teeth. In the south, if anyone was determined to go against Lei Qiuming, they would definitely be tired of living. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of thousands of regular soldiers would submit to him. Among the various tribes in the south, Lei Qiusheng's prestige wasn't as high as Lei Qiuming's. Chapter 436. Two flowers bloomed, each representing a branch. Not to mention the scheming in the south, the northern frontier was not very peaceful either. Lin Yuan sat cross-legged in the northern frontier prince's mansion in Shunning City. His pair of different-colored eyes flashed with a cold light. Li Zhong, Luo Su, Shi Dong, and Zhang Qilin sat in front of Lin Yuan on his left and right respectively. The atmosphere was very somber. Lord Dragon King, this matter is definitely not as simple as it looks. The land clearance has been pushed to the end. Even if the various aristocratic families are unwilling, they should know what is the general trend. For them to jump out at this time, either their brains are damaged, or there is a powerful force behind them. Li Zhong was the first to speak and break the silence, but his eyes fell on Shi Dong. Shi Dong frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "The Association of the Demon Emperor's people are all watching the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. Recently, the aristocratic families have all closed their doors to guests and have no contact with each other. In the letters intercepted by the embroidered uniform guards, there is no mention of the land clearance at all. I can guarantee that the aristocratic families did not communicate with each other. Then you are all useless." Li Zhong snorted and said with a gloomy face, "The aristocratic families all moved in step and sent people to each new gathering place to collect large amounts of farmland, but they did not cultivate it. If it was just one or two families, it could be said that they did it on the spur of the moment and just wanted to annoy us. However, they worked together and did it on the same time. They clearly have other plans. You tell me, this is called not communicating with each other in advance?" As the eyes and ears of the northern frontier, the Association of the Demon Emperor did not send out any information in advance, causing a large amount of farmland to fall into the hands of the aristocratic families. Furthermore, the contracts signed were all for more than 5 years. Now that these aristocratic families did not cultivate it, it seemed to annoy them. However, if they did not hand over the food and phase, it was equivalent to giving Lin Yuan a chance to make a move on them. The aristocratic families in the northern frontier would not be so stupid. They wouldn't just occupy these lands and not cultivate them. When the harvest season came, they would transfer the resources from their own private storehouses to the storehouses of the various settlements on the northern frontier. If that was the case, why would the noble families do something that harmed others without benefiting themselves? Do you think they're really going to transfer supplies from their own storehouse to us? Zhang Qilin reached out and touched his chin. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He said in a cold voice, "How much land do they occupy? If they don't cultivate it, they won't get any harvest. They can't give it to us in proportion. They can only pay taxes strictly according to the standards set by Mr. Li before. I'm wondering if there's a problem with what they're going to hand in." "That's not impossible." Luo Su nodded slightly and said in a low voice, "There are field patrols everywhere. If they farm normally, they have to hand over our share after the harvest. This way, they won't have the chance to do anything." Shi Dong shrugged his shoulders and smiled helplessly. "What's the point of that? Even if they hand in some shoddy old grain, it has to be something that people can eat. Year after year, it's still a huge expense. Even if the noble families on the northern frontier are rich, they won't do something like this just to disgust us, right? Aren't they afraid that we'll settle accounts later? What if it's not old grain, but problematic grain. Luo Su tapped his fingers on the armrest of the chair and sneered. If the noble families on the northern frontier want to survive under the anger of the people, they have to rely on our protection. If they disgust us, we don't even need to deal with them. We only need to remove the ban and let the people vent their anger. They won't have any way to survive. Disgust us won't do them any good. You mean? Li Zhong suddenly stood up. A thin layer of cold sweat even seeped out of his white forehead. He asked, "Plague grain?" As soon as he said that, everyone's faces were filled with fear. Plague grain was a hidden danger that had appeared in every dynasty. It was a common method used by evil cultists. People who ate such grain would quickly contract a strange disease that no medicine could cure. Only the evil cultists who prepared the plague grain would have a specially formulated antidote. If they didn't take the antidote, they would at least die from festering all over. What was even more terrifying was that people who ate the plague grain would contract a strange disease. This disease was very contagious. In addition, the plague grain itself was also very infectious to other grains. Even if 1 stone of the plague grain was stored in the warehouse, it would cause problems for the entire warehouse. Although the 7 dynasties knew about the existence of the plague grain, they didn't have a solution so far. They could only strictly inspect the grain stored in the warehouse. Moreover, after the plague grain problem broke out, the dynasties didn't dare to publicize it. After all, if they couldn't solve the problem, revealing the existence of the plague grain would only make the people panic. It would make the evil cultists even more arrogant and give them a chance to recruit believers. It should be like this. Li Zhong's face was filled with anger. He growled, "The aristocratic families are like this. Even if they have someone behind them, they don't have the guts to go against us directly. Therefore, their plan should be to use the plague grain to throw the entire northern frontier into chaos. At that time, whether it's disaster relief or searching for the antidote, we won't have time to take care of them. Only then will they be able to reap the benefits they want." At this point, Lin Yuan raised his head for the first time. His gaze also fell on Sherdong. Sherdong reached out to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. He said, "Everyone, please calm down. The so-called crisis and plague grain are just your own imagination. Without concrete evidence, what can you do to the aristocratic families? If there is no such thing, how will you deal with it? Have you considered all these?" "Ha!" Luo Su sneered and stood up from his chair. He waved his hand lightly and said coldly, "I don't do things based on evidence. When I go back, I'll capture a few of the aristocratic families' higher-ups and torture them. Even if they have 1,000 or 10,000 schemes, they'll have to spit it out." Sherdong also stood up from his chair. He looked at Luo Su, who was smiling coldly, like an angry beast. "Vice President Shi, what can I do for you?" Looking at the angry Sherdong, the corners of Luo Su's mouth curled up slightly. His originally bandaged face smiled even more ferociously. "Now, 80% of the officials in the northern frontier are from aristocratic families. It'll be good if you can get something out of them. If you can't, how will this matter end? Have you thought about it?" Sherdong slammed the table beside him and roared, "The entire northern frontier's administrative structure is paralyzed. Will you be responsible for it?" Chapter 437. What is your Demon Emperor Association doing? Luo Su maintained a ferocious smile on his face and said coldly, "Didn't you claim to be the eyes and ears of the northern frontier? Now the aristocratic families of the northern frontier are colluding with each other. It's obvious that they are plotting something against us. First you say that you have no evidence, then you say that you need to consider. If your association of the Demon Emperor could collect solid evidence, we wouldn't be sitting here wasting time. That's still better than your embroidered uniform guard coming to Xingyu prison." Zhang Qilin frowned and stood up as well. His sharp eyes fell on Luo Su, and his face was as gloomy as water. Back then, there was a lot of information in the association of the Demon Emperor that even Ding Zai and Shi Dong didn't know about. It came from a group of spies trained by Lin Yuan. With the establishment of the embroidered uniform guard, most of these excellent spies broke away from the association of the Demon Emperor and made Luo Su the commander-in-chief. They formed a spy agency that could compete with the association of the Demon Emperor. After all, the investigation and arrest powers of the embroidered uniform guard belonged to this government office. Although the association of the Demon Emperor, which existed as the eyes and ears of the northern frontier in the past, was also doing these things, it was only in name. Therefore, when the same task was done by two groups of people, the former could directly get the support of the local government, while the latter needed to rely on their friends in Jianghu to slowly investigate. This was the essential difference. Everyone knew that the so-called mutual supervision between the embroidered uniform guard and the association of the Demon Emperor was deliberately pushed by Lin Yuan to compete with the association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard. He didn't want to let one side dominate. But even if everyone knew about Lin Yuan's plan, they didn't have the guts to say anything to Lin Yuan. The incident of the sect of the Blood Divine was like a loud slap on the face of the association of the Demon Emperor. If similar things happened one or two more times, Lin Yuan might even directly abolish the existence of the association of the Demon Emperor and disperse its members to various government offices. Whether they had a good future or not would depend on their own luck. Whether it was the newly established embroidered uniform guard that was determined to establish its power. Still, the various presidents and vice presidents who did not wish for the Shifter Emperors Association to be disbanded just like that. The two secret service agencies were bracing themselves to confront each other at the northern frontier. Both sides were staring at each other's movements. No one wanted the other side to gain the upper hand. As for why Zhang Qilin spoke, it was entirely because he disliked the embroidered uniform guards led by Luo Su. With Luo Su, a commander-in-chief who would do anything to achieve his goals, the embroidered uniform guards could be said to be extremely deranged. Anyone who was suspicious would be dragged back to the local prison and interrogated by torture. Because some local government officials did not cooperate, the embroidered uniform guards set up private prisons and execution grounds. The entire Yamen was filled with hostility. Although the embroidered uniform guards and the Shifter Emperor would fight against each other, and the security of the northern frontier, which Zhang Qilin was in charge of, seemed to be peaceful on the surface, but the undercurrent was surging in the dark. It was even a little jittery. The people at the northern frontier were angry but did not dare to say anything. They were suppressing their dissatisfaction. Sooner or later, there would be a big problem. And no matter what the embroidered uniform guards did, it was Zhang Qilin who would clean up their mess. Now, when the name Luo Su was mentioned in the northern frontier, the people would spit on the ground and curse him. And Zhang Qilin, who cleaned up Luo Su's mess, naturally got scolded a lot. Many officers of the northern battlefront army had complained to Zhang Qilin about it more than once. "I don't care." Luo Su sneered and spread his hands. He said in a deep voice, "You can criticize me, but you can't stop me from doing my job. When I go back, I will catch a few masters and interrogate them. If you want to stop me, you'd better find out the truth before I offend all the families at the northern frontier." As his voice fell, Luo Su swung his sleeves and walked out of the meeting room directly. "Lunatic, unreasonable," Shi Dong murmured with a pale face. The worry in his eyes was so thick that it could not be dispersed. After Luo Su left, Shi Dong and Zhang Qilin cupped their fists to Lin Yuan and walked out of the meeting room side by side. "They're all gone. It's quiet now. Do you have anything else to say?" Lin Yuan's gaze swept over Li Zhong's white and jade-like face, and his voice revealed a bit of indescribable laziness, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Li Zhong sat in his seat. His fingertips gently tapped on his knee. He said expressionlessly, "The embroidered uniform guards and the association of the Demon Emperor are now in a stalemate. They can't tell who is stronger and who is weaker. You can still live in peace. If you let go of the northern frontier, these two forces will definitely start a bloody and dark fight. By then, all the officials at the northern frontier will not have a good ending. What do you mean? Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong from the corner of his eyes. He still maintained his lazy tone. Separate Sherdong from the Association of the Demon Emperor, which focuses on intelligence. Divide the intelligence of the northern frontier into public and private departments. The main force of the Association of the Demon Emperor will be in charge of public transport. The private information that cannot be shared with outsiders will be jointly handled by Sherdong and Luo Su. With the Association of the Demon Emperor as the main force, set up a new government office to specialize in this matter. However, the personnel must be selected from the embroidered uniform guards. In short, in the future, Sherdong will take the initiative and Luo Su will do the work. Vice versa. It's true that the two sides check and balance each other, but they have to know who is stronger and who is weaker. If things continue like this, everyone wants to suppress the other. I'm afraid that even they will not have a good ending. Li Zhong took a deep breath. There was a faint look of fear in his eyes. When living creatures roamed the world, no matter what the reason was, they would more or less have some secrets. The embroidered uniform guards and the Association of the Demon Emperor were the kind of monsters that left no place to hide their secrets. When two terrifying monsters fought against each other, casually revealing some of their secrets would be enough to consign many people to eternal damnation. Go back and draw up a plan for this matter. Mention it at the next meeting and pass it directly. Lin Yuan yawned. He turned his head and looked straight at Li Zhong. What do you mean? Li Zhong suddenly shivered. He looked at Lin Yuan in disbelief. The conferring of the title of King of the Northern Frontier was not just a verbal announcement. One had to spend time and resources to prepare a grand ceremony to announce to the people of the Northern Frontier. Previously, Lei Fan's conferring ceremony had been held together with Lin Yuan's conferring ceremony. Although the scale of Hu Yan's conferring ceremony was not small, but because of Lin Yuan's restrictions, it was actually only limited to Shunning City. But for Li Zhong, the third king of the northern frontier, Lin Yuan was going to delegate his power to him. Naturally, he could not be careless or disrespectful. It was just that before the preparations for the conferring ceremony were completed, Lin Yuan had to show a moderate amount of trust and respect for Li Zhong. As long as it did not involve the fundamental issues of the new policies, even if it was something that Lin Yuan had discussed with Li Zhong, he had to let Li Zhong have some face. Chapter 438. You are the king of the northern frontier. Naturally, you should make the decision. Lin Yuan's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. He sneered, Sherdong and Luo Su have different ways of doing things, but they are both smart people. Even you, an outsider, can think of the hidden dangers of the conflict between the Shifter Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard. Can't the two of them see that if they continue to fight, no one will have a good ending? As his voice fell, Li Zhong's face turned solemn, and he stared at Lin Yuan. Sherdong didn't say anything on the surface, but he didn't object when the matter of the epidemic food was brought up. He didn't mean to say that he wouldn't do it, but to remind you, the king of the northern frontier, that you should draw up a plan to appease the northern frontier aristocratic families. Otherwise, when the time comes, the aristocratic families will be implicated and there will be no one in the northern frontier administration. However, the matter of the aristocratic families playing tricks is the most important in Sherdong's heart. He knows very well that you and I will not let the Shifter Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard continue to fight like this. There will definitely be a distinction between him and Luo Su. Then, this task that can affect the entire northern frontier is the best opportunity for them to prove their abilities. Whoever does this well may become the new head of the secret agents in the northern frontier. Therefore, Sherdong said that the aristocratic families didn't make any moves, but after noticing that something was wrong, his people must be investigating this matter. As for Luo Su, I have never seen such a scheming person in my life. If he doesn't work for me, I must get rid of him as soon as possible. In terms of strategy, he is not as good as you. In terms of military strategy, he is not as good as Li Zhongsheng. In terms of governance, he is not as good as Zhang Qilin. Even in terms of investigation and arrest, he is not as good as Shi Dong when he just started. Now, he seems to be unreasonable, ruthless, and unscrupulous in his actions, causing complaints in the northern frontier. Even among his colleagues, he is not liked. But, isn't this just him tarnishing his own reputation? The playfulness in Lin Yuan's eyes deepened. He sneered, Luo Su is cursed because of his way of doing things. Isn't this what he wants? What he wanted to show me was this version of himself. Right now, Luo Su only has the position of governor of the embroidered uniform guard to protect his own safety. It would be easy for me to deal with him. If he doesn't listen, I only need to remove him from his position. In less than 3 days, Luo Su will definitely die a tragic death. The serious expression on Li Zhong's face turned into one of horror, and his eyes even revealed some palpitations. No matter how good Luo Su was at investigating and arresting, he had a thorough grasp of the thoughts of those in power. Luo Su was now living a prestigious life, relying on Lin Yuan's protection. Once he lost Lin Yuan's favor, he would immediately be reduced to a pile of bones in the grave. For those in power, Luo Su was a competent and easy-to-control ruthless official. No one would dislike him. But there are 2 sides to everything. Luo Su was able to betray Lei Fan in the past, and in the future, he would be able to betray me. Aren't the aristocratic families of the northern frontier also relying on our protection to survive? Now that they are playing with schemes and plots, they are not showing any mercy. So, Luo Su may seem easy to deal with, but when you really get into a fight, you will find that this fellow is a hedgehog full of thorns. The slightest carelessness and he will prick your hand full of blood. Speaking up to here, Lin Yuan suddenly opened his mouth and laughed silently. He said sarcastically, Shi Dong and Luo Su may not be loyal. It still depends on how you, the king of the northern frontier, are able to wield these 2 double-edged swords. Anyway, this is not a problem that I should be worrying about. You can slowly grind it out. Your student understands. Li Zhong laughed bitterly and clasped his fists towards Lin Yuan. Working under this black jiao, it could be said that there were surprises everywhere. It was true that the authority of the northern frontier king was given to him, but God knows how many more ticking time bombs like Luo Su and Shi Dong were waiting for him. If he did not handle it properly one day, or if he was about to be abandoned, these things could easily take his head. The people under Lin Yuan's command actually all had their own thoughts and were divided into different factions. But when Lin Yuan used people, it was as if he was ordering them around like an arm. What he used was the individual selfishness of these people and the purpose of each faction to balance each other out. Li Zhong suddenly thought of the emperor's schemes that his former teacher had taught him. Now, when used on Lin Yuan, it was as laughable as a child bickering. What thunder and rain were the emperor's grace, what balance of power, Lin Yuan grasped it perfectly. Don't look at how Lin Yuan did not actually control any yamen in the northern frontier. These yamen were not even loyal to Lin Yuan, but Lin Yuan was able to make these people perfectly carry out his will. If there was anyone who was not convinced and wanted to rebel, they would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Li Zhong suddenly realized that Lin Yuan had planted a seed of fear in his heart at some unknown time. But even though he realized this, he still could not overcome it in the face of Lin Yuan's various methods and contingencies. Just like the present rebel armies of the Xinwu dynasty. They appeared to be very powerful, but they were all thinking of how to take advantage of this chaotic world to obtain some benefits for themselves. The only one who truly wanted to pull Lei Qiusheng down from the throne was probably the Qingping king. I have a general direction. Do as you see fit. I have to make a trip back to the Henduan Mountains in this period of time. I don't have time to scheme against each other on the northern frontier. Lin Yuan gently waved his tail, indicating for Li Zhong to leave. Only then did Li Zhong stand up from his chair and walk out of the conference room. The moment the door of the conference room closed, Li Zhong leaned against the door frame as if he had lost all his strength. His chest rose and fell violently, and his mouth and nose panted heavily. His forehead was covered in sweat. He knew very well that Lin Yuan might not have returned to the Hengduan Mountains because he had something to do. It was just that as long as Lin Yuan was in charge of the northern frontier, the northern frontier would not be in chaos. He was like a stabilizing needle, firmly suppressing those with ulterior motives and not daring to appear. Once Lin Yuan left the northern frontier, these invisible undercurrents would instantly turn into stormy waves that smashed onto them. The slightest bit of carelessness would result in their bodies being smashed to pieces. Similarly, Lin Yuan gave them a general direction before leaving. If they did their job well, Lin Yuan would naturally not appear. But if they did not do their job well, Lin Yuan could return with the general momentum and stabilize the northern frontier in one fell swoop. He would catch all those who jumped out and at the same time, reshuffle the current situation of the aristocratic families in the northern frontier. Advance and retreat appropriately without any flaws. This was Lin Yuan's path. All the reforms and adventures did not fall behind, but all the risks fell on their heads. As long as Lin Yuan still appeared on the northern frontier, it meant that the northern frontier could still be saved, and Lin Yuan would definitely be the victorious party. Chapter 439. The next day, early in the morning. In the newly built Anhan city on the northern frontier. Luo Su, dressed in a bluish-white robe and a black cloak embroidered with a dragon on the back, sat upright outside the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard. Behind him, embroidered uniform guards in red flying fish robes, blue kirin robes, and yellow bullfighting robes poured out of the wide open door, their bright steel sabers gleaming coldly under the light of dawn. Horses galloped through the streets. Some of them were dragging well-dressed, fat people back to the embroidered uniform guard's office, while others were throwing naked people with disheveled hair out of the office. Although it was almost summer, the temperature was not too high. The northern frontier was known for its bitter cold, and the climate was naturally not as warm as the south. Although these naked people all had cultivation, their limbs and bones were controlled by special metal shackles, and their jinqi and gangqi could only be trapped in their dantian. Not only could they not dispel the chill, but they also made their chests and abdomens feel suffocated. You are all people of repute. Not to mention in this small Anhan city, even in the northern frontier, your names can be said to reverberate like thunder. Why do you want to fight to the death with this commander-in-chief just because of a moment of anger? In a while, this street will be full of people. You certainly don't want to kneel here naked and be surrounded by people, do you? Luo Su gently patted the saber at his waist, his bandaged face full of a sinister smile, and said in a cold voice, "If you can't stand this hardship, you can tell this commander-in-chief. You only need to tell me 3 secrets, and this commander-in-chief will respectfully send you away. Another day, I will personally prepare a generous gift to apologize to you. How about it?" In Luo Su's view, although the aristocratic families were awe-inspiring, they had a fatal weakness: face. These naked people were naturally not ordinary people who had committed any major or important crimes, but the heads of aristocratic families within the sphere of influence of Luo Su's embroidered uniform guard and other lackeys. 3 secrets in exchange for not making a fool of themselves seemed like a loss, but Luo Su believed that there were plenty of people who would be willing to cooperate with him. As the old saying went, the aristocratic families of the northern frontier had multiplied and lived for many years, and any 2 of their children could be related. The aristocratic families were no strangers to each other's dirty affairs. Not to mention 3 secrets, they could even tell 30 secrets at their fingertips. But the situation now was special. The aristocratic families had to be of the same breadth and branch in order to stand as an equal with the northern frontier prince's mansion. At this time, for the sake of face, if they flirted with the northern frontier's lackeys, they would certainly not end. Of course, to say that they stood as an equal was to flatter themselves. Although the people of the northern frontier had blamed the aristocratic families for the land confiscation, the northern frontier prince's mansion did not want to exterminate the aristocratic families, so it had been quietly downplaying the matter. Although the aristocratic families of the northern frontier were still hated by the people, it was not to the extent that they could not even leave the house like before. After 5 breaths of silence, seeing that no one spoke, the sinister smile on Luo Su's face stiffened slightly, and he said with a gloomy face, "It seems that none of the heads of the aristocratic families have anything to say. Okay, then we'll see you in the afternoon." As his voice fell, Luo Su stood up from the armchair, turned and walked back into the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard. 2 embroidered uniform guards guarding the door came up to him, one on the left and one on the right. Luo Su glanced at the trembling heads of aristocratic families out of the corner of his eye and ordered in a low voice, "The number of heads of aristocratic families kneeling here is at least 800, if not 1,000. You won't be able to get anything out of them if they are so stiff. After another incense stick of time, if they are still unwilling to tell me the secrets I want to hear, you will separate them and take them to various markets, city gates, commercial streets and other crowded places. At that time, there will definitely be people who will beg for mercy because of their face. Separate them and bring them to see me." "Yes." The 2 embroidered uniform guards cupped their fists at Luo Su and responded in a low voice. Half an hour later, Luo Su sat in the lobby of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, and a fair-skinned fat man wrapped in a messy cloth robe was brought up. Narrowing his eyes and looking at the other party for a long time, Luo Su saw some clues from the unkempt face. He sneered and said, "Isn't this the rich merchant of Anhan City, Master Wang? How did you end up like this after I didn't see you for a while?" Master Wang secretly snorted in his heart, but on the surface, he smiled apologetically. "I had a misunderstanding with the governor's subordinates. It's okay, it's okay. The governor is now the favorite of the Dragon King. Surely you won't detain us for no reason, right? If this matter were to spread, it would be bad for the governor's reputation. We are businessmen, and we don't do things that harm others without benefiting ourselves. The governor should speak frankly. What do you want to know?" The heads of aristocratic families were all prideful. When they heard that the embroidered uniform guard was going to take them to crowded places like the market, city gates, commercial streets, and so on, they were naturally unwilling. Although it was shameful to kneel in front of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, due to Luo Su's usual violent style, not to mention the embroidered uniform guard yamen, even the entire street was filled with embroidered uniform guard cavalry or secret agents. There were not many people who dared to join in the fun. But if they were to kneel naked in the middle of a busy street, it was a different matter. At that time, the heads of the aristocratic families held their breaths and wanted to make a move. However, their cultivation and limbs were restricted, so how could they fight against the fiendish embroidered uniform guards? Many of the heads of the aristocratic families who rose up to resist were beaten up. Among them, after being beaten up, there were many who suddenly understood that Luo Su had made such a big move. It was definitely not just to scare them. If they did not take some goods from them, they would only lose face today. Tomorrow, they might lose some parts of their bodies. Therefore, Master Wang quickly adjusted his mentality and put on the face of a businessman. He understood that he just wanted benefits. Luo Su blew the tea in the cup and said expressionlessly, "Didn't I say? Each of you will tell me 3 secrets. What you want to tell me, doesn't it all depend on what you want to say? What do you mean by what I want to hear?" The smile on Master Wang's face froze. He carefully probed, then. "Commander, can I go home directly after I tell you 3 secrets?" Luo Su definitely did not have any good intentions. He had made up his mind. Once he got out of the embroidered uniform guard yamen, he would immediately contact the sons of aristocratic families all over the northern frontier. They would jointly go to the northern frontier prince's mansion to complain. Even if there was no result, he had to make a big deal out of it. At least, he had to let himself exist in the eyes of the public. He could not let Luo Su quietly capture him like today, or send a few secret agents to directly take his life. This move could also guarantee his position and show that he did not betray the aristocratic families of the northern frontier. He had just escaped from the tiger's mouth and was thinking of ways to rescue these old brothers who were still suffering. Chapter 440. Old Master Wang must be joking. Luo Su took a sip of tea and slammed the teacup on the table. He sneered, Old Master Wang is an expert in business. Naturally, you know the principle of different times and different prices. I said before that if you told me 3 secrets, I would let you go. But you didn't cherish this opportunity. Now, why do you still want to sell the same thing at the original price? Speaking of this, Luo Su lowered his chin and sneered, if it was the same business, Old Master Wang wouldn't do it, right? Of course, of course. Old Master Wang once again put on a smiling face and nodded and bowed. I didn't expect the commander to be proficient in business. I'm impressed. It's just that I really don't know what the commander wants to do. Naturally, I can't open my mouth. Why don't you give me a few more pointers? Perhaps I just happen to know the secret that the commander wants to know. The embroidered uniform guard was such a large yamen. There were so many people in the yamen who needed salaries. Opening a private prison and making torture instruments all required money. The northern frontier Wangfu certainly couldn't fork out all of it. After all, there was the existence of the Council of the Demon Emperor eyeing them covetously. If the northern frontier Wangfu was too biased towards the embroidered uniform guard, the Council of the Demon Emperor would certainly not be willing. Therefore, it wasn't the first time that the embroidered uniform guard had captured people and extorted them from these aristocratic families. Old Master Wang naturally couldn't leave any traces of gossip and give Luo Su another chance to find trouble with him. He was as smooth as a ball. Didn't I say it already? 3 secrets. Once you're done talking about this matter, it's over. As for what I want to hear and what you know, it has nothing to do with you. Do you understand? Luo Su bent down, a playful look appearing in his eyes. He said, it's just that Old Master Wang has been wronged. After you tell me the secrets today, you'll have to stay in the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard for a while. Of course, I'll take good care of you. Old Master Wang couldn't help but shudder when he heard that. Even though he had never stayed in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, he had neither eaten pork nor seen pigs run. That damned place was not a place where anyone could come out unscathed. In the dark prison, there were boiled carrots for every meal, and there were all sorts of torture tools and punishments. Even if the King of Heaven came, he would not be able to have a good life in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, much less a small merchant like him. If he could be caught and sent to the embroidered uniform guard's private prison, it meant that the cases he was involved in were all heaven-defying. 1 or 2 rounds of torture would not be able to get anything out of him. Therefore, when it came to interrogations in the embroidered uniform guard, they were particular about grinding. They had to grind slowly to get what they wanted. Under these circumstances, the officials of the embroidered uniform guard tortured ordinary people not for the sake of finding out the truth, but for the sake of torturing them for fun. They were all temperamental and difficult to deal with. When the prisoners who were caught had been ground to the point where they lost their temper and sharpness, they would naturally tell everything they knew. At that time, they could be forced to the Yamen's court to be interrogated. Therefore, outsiders often said that the embroidered uniform guard was easy to deal with, but the little ghosts were hard to deal with. Of course, the embroidered uniform guard's yamen was also a place that valued money. Even if you had heaven-defying cases, as long as you didn't rush them, the little ghosts below would naturally think of a way to squeeze every last bit of profit out of you. As long as you were willing to spend money, even if you were in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, you could still enjoy extremely honorable treatment. Even if you wanted to stay in a villa or watch a play, as long as you could afford it, you could still be satisfied. However, the problem was that the embroidered uniform guards' prisons, which required money to stay in, were all clearly priced. A cup of water could cost you 10 taels of silver, and a brand new bed and bedding could cost you 5 taels of gold. In Old Master Wang's opinion, if you were to stay in the embroidered uniform guard's yamen, regardless of whether the other party used lynching or not, he would still be able to peel off a layer of skin. However, Luo Su and the embroidered uniform guard's actions had always been so arrogant and despotic. Old Master Wang didn't dare to harden his scalp and nag at Luo Su. If Luo Su felt that he was being perfunctory, or even toying with him, then it wouldn't be as simple as bleeding a little. After telling Luo Su 3 insignificant little secrets, an embroidered uniform guard Baihu strode forward, grabbed old Master Wang's shackles, and brought him in the direction of the private prison in the backyard. At this time, another aristocratic family head was also led into the hall by an embroidered uniform guard, and, just so, saw old Master Wang's back as he left. Pang! This time, Luo Su no longer had the insignificant attitude from before. Suddenly, he slammed his palm on the table beside him, instantly shattering the rosewood table into fine powder. Walking down the hall, he quickly walked in front of the aristocratic family head and kicked him in the stomach. With a cold face, he said, "You guys are really bold. If it weren't for the protection of the Northern Frontier Prince's estate, would your aristocratic family still exist in the Northern Frontier? What, do you have to go against the Northern Frontier Prince's estate?" The head of the aristocratic family, who had been kicked to the ground, was just about to get up when the embroidered uniform guard who had led him in quickly stepped forward and stomped on his chest. A copious amount of power exploded, directly suppressing him to the point where he could not even get up. Thinking of the change in Luo Su's attitude, and then thinking of old Master Wang who had just walked into the embroidered uniform guard Yaman's backyard, the aristocratic family head's heart suddenly thumped, and his eyes abruptly revealed a venomous look. He was now 80% sure that old Master Wang, who had just entered the backyard, had definitely said something serious to Luo Su. Otherwise, Luo Su wouldn't have directly dealt such a heavy blow without a certain degree of certainty. "Ha, what is Commander Luo talking about? How come I don't understand?" Although he had imagined a great drama of being betrayed by a traitor, for the sake of stability, the aristocratic family had still braced himself and planned to laugh it off with Luo Su to see if this matter could be covered up. "You don't understand? Then I'll give you a few pointers. Autumn grain, arable land, land management." Luo Su's cold gaze fell on the aristocratic family head's face, instantly making him feel as if he was being stared at by a poisonous snake. After a moment of silence, Luo Su squatted down and reached out to pat the aristocratic family head's cheek. He laughed coldly and said, "Son of a bitch, do you think that the embroidered uniform guard is useless and that we can't even control your every move? Do you think that you can hide your little actions from us? Think carefully about the people who knelt in front of the embroidered uniform guard Yaman today, and those who were later brought here. Wasn't one of them in cahoots with you?" At this point, even if the aristocratic family head still had some delusions in his heart, at this moment, he was dealt a blow. His last line of psychological defense collapsed, and only then did the aristocratic family head kneel in front of Luo Su with tears and snot running down his face. Although he didn't speak, he kept kowtowing. Chapter 441. Nothing more than this. Luo Su sneered and muttered after his subordinates brought away the weeping master of the aristocratic family who confessed all his crimes. The disdain in his eyes grew stronger. Everyone was afraid of the aristocratic families. In the past, they were afraid that the aristocratic family's power was enough to overturn the entire northern frontier. Now that the aristocratic family's foundation was completely cut off by Lin Yuan, they began to fear that the aristocratic families would not be willing to submit and assist the king of the northern frontier. They were worried that any excessive action would stimulate the aristocratic families to stake everything on a single throw, causing the northern frontier to fall from a paradise to a living hell. However, there was an exception. It was not him, Luo Su. It was Lin Yuan. Although Mo Luo, who was by Lin Yuan's side, could suppress the pain of the purgatory flame, it did not eliminate it. Mo Luo still had to constantly guard against the invasion of the purgatory demon beasts in the Stoneclaw forest. Therefore, Luo Su still had to endure the pain of the purgatory flame most of the time. Every day and night was a kind of torture for him. However, Luo Su was not willing to die just like that. Therefore, Luo Su treated Lin Yuan and Mo Luo as medicine to delay the arrival of his death, allowing him to make a career out of this crippled body of his. All of Luo Su's crazy actions and unscrupulous means were all under Lin Yuan's tacit consent and even instructions. The aristocratic family's descendants worked as officials in the northern frontier prince's mansion. Once they became disloyal, it would indeed cause problems in the administration of the northern frontier. However, Lin Yuan was not afraid of these problems. These people were willing to serve the northern frontier honestly. Naturally, they could guarantee themselves and their descendants glory, splendor and wealth. However, once they became disloyal, even if the Northern Frontier Army and the Southern Expedition Army stood on their side, they would still be like ants. What was behind Lin Yuan's back? It was the Hunduan mountain range. It was the demon beast imperial court. Even if the northern frontier was in turmoil, as long as Lin Yuan nodded his head, the demonic beasts would have nothing to worry about, and they could slaughter the entire northern frontier in an instant. A human army without sturdy city equipment was so vulnerable in the eyes of the demonic beasts. Even if they could not take down the human army once or twice, the demonic beasts, whose reproductive ability far exceeded that of human beings, would sooner or later slaughter all the rebels. After killing all these people, would there be no more officials at the northern frontier? That might not be the case. The Northern Frontier Prince's mansion was no longer a puppet organization under the control of Lei Fan and Hu Yan. With Li Zhong, the poor Confucian who had single-handedly plotted the calamity of the aristocratic families, there was no longer a day for those capable officials of commoner origin to make a name for themselves. Even if these people were unable to influence the entire northern frontier, but with the establishment of the Northern Frontier Academy, in 3, 5, 10 years, Lin Yuan would only have to worry about not having enough official positions in his hands, not having no one to use. Without destruction, there can be no construction, and only after chaos can there be governance. This was something that Lin Yuan had personally told Luo Su. If not for Lin Yuan's tacit approval, how could these demonic beasts that had been separated from the Demon Emperor Association be able to steadily gain the upper hand under the suppression of the various officials and aristocratic families, forcing Shi Dong and Zhang Qilin to band together for protection? The change of authority in the northern frontier was very fast. In less than half a year, just the northern frontier king alone had changed 3 times, not to mention the other positions. This was because Lin Yuan was very clear that other than Li Zhong, who was from a poor family, Gao Buzhen, who was ostracized by others, and Yan Xingqi, who was filled with resentment towards Lei Qiusheng, no one else would submit to him, a demonic beast. Now, the northern frontier seemed to be as stable as Mount Tai, but in reality, there were many different factions, and everyone had their own plans. Under such circumstances, not many people could bear Lin Yuan's trust, and not many people could withstand Lin Yuan's test. Therefore, purges and changes became the main channel for the officials in the northern frontier. A batch of disobedient people would be replaced. Over time, Lin Yuan's subordinates were all from poor families, and could at least guarantee the most basic loyalty. At that time, whether it was the Xinwu dynasty, the northern frontier aristocratic families, or even the other 6 great empires, they could forget about meddling in the northern frontier. And at that time, Lin Yuan would be able to completely stabilize his position as the king of the northern frontier. Like Li Zhong, Luo Su was also very clear about his position. He was a dog that Lin Yuan raised. Whoever Lin Yuan told him to bite, he had to bite. Even without Lin Yuan's instructions, he had to monitor the entire northern frontier and collect evidence of everyone's crimes in case of an emergency. At the same time, he had to incite conflict between the various factions to maintain the main theme of the northern frontier's internal strife. If he wasn't willing to be an obedient dog, the pain of the purgatory flames burning his heart could turn him into a vicious madman at any time. What iron-willed and iron-blooded loyalty! Nothing was worth mentioning in the face of true pain. If he was unwilling to be a dog, then this was the only path to death. With the example of Lord Wang and the second head of the aristocratic family, Luo Su very quickly prepared the heads of aristocratic families who could not bear the shame and ran to him to beg for mercy. Confessions were signed and stamped, and embroidered uniform guards galloped out of the yamen. One after another, the warehouses and houses of the northern frontier aristocratic families that stored the epidemic food were seized. One after another, influential figures of the northern frontier were thrown off their horses. After all this was done, Luo Su let out a long breath. He sorted out the confessions and evidence in his hands and put them all into a black handbag. Then, he walked out of the embroidered uniform guard yamen and strode toward the gates of Anhan City. 4 hours later, Li Zhong, who was sitting in the Wang mansion in Beijing, received the official documents sent by the embroidered uniform guard yamen. After carefully reading the confessions and evidence, he let out a long breath and leaned weakly on the chair. He stared coldly at the messenger of the embroidered uniform guard standing in front of his desk. After a moment of silence, he frowned and said, "Your commander-in-chief did not extort confessions from these aristocratic family heads by torture, right?" Although everyone knew that the yamen of the embroidered uniform guard and the prison of the Association of the Demon Emperor were not places to reason, as long as one was arrested for committing a crime and came out intact, it meant that one had betrayed one's original companions and confessed everything that one knew. Even if one were to fabricate something out of nothing, it was not a rare thing in this kind of unreasonable yamen. However, it was clearly written in the laws of the northern region that anyone who was arrested and sent to prison had to be in the same state as they were before they were arrested, regardless of whether they suffered external or internal injuries. When the higher officials interrogated them, they could request that their previous testimony be overturned and that their confessions had been coerced into confessions by the yamen. Although it was true that Luo Su had seized a lot of epidemic food and warehouses, once the aristocratic family heads overturned their testimony, it was bound to turn this matter into a struggle between the aristocratic families of the northern frontier and the northern frontier Wang mansion. As time went by, any unforeseen event could happen. Therefore, even though he was sure that Luo Su was not a person without a plan, Li Zhong was still worried and asked. Chapter 442. Rest assured, Your Highness. How could our commander-in-chief do such a thing as lifting a rock and dropping it on his own foot? The messenger from the brocade guard laughed and explained Luo Su's methods. In the end, he said in a cold voice, even if the heads of these aristocratic families want to continue making trouble, the epidemic food we seized and the storehouses are all things that cannot be faked. If Hu Yan was still in charge of the northern frontier prince's mansion, they could still cover up their lies and push out some scapegoats to take the blame. However, our commander-in-chief said that Your Highness absolutely cannot do such evil things and continue to connive with these northern frontier aristocratic families. Very good. Go and receive your reward. Li Zhong nodded at the messenger from the brocade guard, indicating that he should withdraw. Luo Su's movements in Anhan City were not small. The aristocratic families of the northern frontier were likely to have noticed that their plans had been exposed ahead of time. At this time, they should not be trying their best to distance themselves from the relationship, or they should be staking everything on a single throw. Li Zhong was an expert in politics and strategy. To put it bluntly, let alone the northern frontier, as long as the officials under him could strictly carry out his orders, even if the entire Shenwu dynasty was in his hands, Li Zhong was confident that he would be able to govern it in an orderly manner. However, politics and strategy were purely mental work. If he were to be like Lin Yuan and be able to understand people's hearts to the extreme, clearly aware of his every move, what the chess player opposite him would think, what the chess pieces on the chessboard would think, then it would be difficult for him. Li Zhong did not have a good solution to the current situation. He could only hope that the aristocratic families of the northern frontier would know that their plans had been exposed and would do their best to distance themselves from the relationship. With the supervision of the brocade guard and the council of the Demon Emperor, these epidemic food could not be transported to other places. Therefore, the aristocratic families of the northern frontier could only think of ways to destroy the epidemic food stored in their own homes. Without these life-threatening things, the two sides could slowly wrestle with each other. When the time was right, they could use a series of decrees such as business tax reduction to stabilize the hearts of the people on the northern frontier and let the officials from aristocratic families rise up. Everything would not be messed up, and things would develop in a good direction. Thank you, Your Highness. The messenger of the embroidered uniform guard grinned and bowed to Li Zhong. Then, he walked out of the door. None of the members of the embroidered uniform guard were officials. They were all spies that Lin Yuan had carefully cultivated from the association of the Demon Emperor. Without Lin Yuan's personal orders, even Luo Su, the commander-in-chief of the embroidered uniform guard, would not be able to command them. Naturally, they would not be interested in the king of the northern frontier. Moreover, he was very clear about his own identity. Even in the brocade guard, he was an existence that could not be brought to the table. At present, Luo Su and Li Zhong did not show any signs of discord, and Li Zhong had no intention of rebelling against Lin Yuan. Naturally, he would not cultivate his own henchmen in the brocade guard. Therefore, there was no need for the embroidered uniform guard messenger to kneel and lick Li Zhong's boots, and there was even less need for Li Zhong to be courteous to a messenger. After the two sides finished their official business, they would mind their own business. It was hard to say whether they would have a second chance to meet in this lifetime. However, before Li Zhong could relax, the messenger from the Association of the Demon Emperor came to the table. Your Highness, there are secret treasures coming from all over the northern frontier. A large number of unidentified Jianghu people have committed crimes. Although the local authorities have reacted quickly, there are still many houses and storehouses that have caught fire. Vice President Shi has personally taken action. His subordinates have also gone to the prisons of the local authorities to retrieve the prisoners. Before leaving, he asked me to inform Your Highness and ask Your Highness to send the relevant official seal as soon as possible. After all, the messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor did not have an official status. Therefore, when he spoke to Li Zhong, he was kneeling on the ground. Are you sure? The news came from all over? Hearing the bad news, Li Zhong's face did not show much surprise. Instead, his heart suddenly sank as he asked in a stern voice. The messenger of the Association of the Demon Emperor pondered for a moment before shaking his head gently. He said, there have been no secret reports from Taicang, Pingwang, and Min-en. Vice President Shi has tried to get in touch with them, but everything, including the messenger, has been lost. We still don't know the situation in these three cities. Bang! Hearing this, Li Zhong's face immediately revealed a look of resentment. He punched the table in front of him heavily. The Jianghu people committing crimes was just a cover-up. The truth was that the northern frontier aristocratic families had set fire to the epidemic food. With Luo Su's actions, the northern frontier aristocratic families knew that they could not do it. Naturally, they would not risk their lives to carry out this plan. Therefore, when he heard this news, Li Zhong did not feel anything. He even felt slightly relieved. However, there was still no news from the three cities. Even the Association of the Demon Emperor did not know about the situation there. This wasn't good news. Although the three cities were located at the northern frontier and were even close to the demonic beast forest, as old cities, they were one of the most powerful gathering places in the northern frontier in terms of population and military power. At the same time, they were also one of the most chaotic places. Now, all the gathering places in the northern frontier were rioting and arson. However, there was no news from the three cities. Obviously, it was not because of good public order. Perhaps the government of the three cities had already colluded with the northern frontier aristocratic families to carry out the epidemic food plan by force. They might even gather their troops and openly rebel. Otherwise, it would be a fool's dream to hide from the Association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guards with the power of the northern frontier aristocratic families. Although the embroidered uniform guards had government offices and the Association of the Demon Emperor had contact points, there were not many people stationed in these places. Most of the spies were hidden in various areas of the gathering places. There were people from all walks of life. If the local government had not mobilized troops to seal the cities, it would be impossible for no news to leak out. Moreover, the three cities were not newly established residential areas. They were three of the original 7 cities at the border. Aristocratic families stood in great numbers. Now that they knew that their plan had been exposed, they still joined forces to seal the 3 cities. Obviously, they were going to give it their all. The northern frontier aristocratic families were not worth mentioning in Li Zhong's eyes. However, the news from the embroidered uniform guards pointed out that there was another expert behind the northern frontier aristocratic families. It was Kang Lezin of the Four United Group that he had heard from Lin Yuan before. He was a terrifying existence whose realm was above the Kongming realm. Even if such a person did not play tricks, he could easily destroy the northern frontier with a wave of his hand. Moreover, he had no intention of finding trouble with Lin Yuan. Instead, he was secretly colluding with the northern frontier aristocratic families to put on a big show for Lin Yuan. Now it seemed that this Kang Lezin should be in one of the 3 cities. Who knew what kind of ultimate move he was brewing? This was not a game, but a real rebellion. Li Zhong was very clear that he could not make any mistakes. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.